Good afternoon and welcome to the WEIM Regional Issues Forum. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. If you require technical assistance, you can send a chat to me, your event producer. For chat questions, you can submit questions throughout the presentation to all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel. Enter your question in the message box provided and send. For audio questions, all audio lines have been muted until the Q&A portion of the call. For those who have joined through WebEx, you may raise your hand by navigating to the bottom of your screen and pressing the raised hand button. For those who have joined our phone-only line, you can raise your hand by pressing #2. Now, there will be a quick safety debriefing before we turn it over to the first speaker.
Thank you so much. Well, hi there, everybody. My name is Zach. I work in business continuity here at the California ISO. And while you guys are here, just wanted to give you a quick safety brief just in case anything kind of happens. In the event of any medical emergency, your contact is going to be Sienna here. So please let her know. She'll be able to get in contact with us just on the other side of that wall or security. And our security is also AED trained, so be able to provide some level of support for you guys while we have EMS or fire on the way for you. In the event of a lockdown, every single door in this room is lockable. Our security staff is also firearm trained and have them on their side. They'll be able to deal with any threat in case of that sort of instance. In the event of an evacuation, any of these doors, if you exit also where you came from, through the lobby, through the front towards B, also down towards the south, down the stairwell, and then down towards evacuation area C. Those will probably be your quickest evacuation routes, and we'll be able to make sure everybody is safe from there. Otherwise, if you guys need to use the bathrooms, they are just on the other side of that door. And that is all I got for you. If you have any questions, please let me or Sienna know. Have a great day. Thanks.
With that, I'll turn the call over to Josh Walter, the RIF Chair and EIM Entity Sector Liaison. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for being here. We're gonna maybe to set off the meeting, go through a string of announcements. I'd like to hand the microphone over to Stacy Crowley for some remarks from the CAISO.
Thank you, Chair Walter, and thanks to the Regional Issues Forum liaisons for being here and those that are in person, but also over the phone. We just really are thankful for you, your work, and the thoughtful development of the Regional Issues Forum over time. I just want to say a quick, again, thanks for getting this, the discussion about the roadmap kicked off. I think it's a long time coming. We've been excited to have this element of discussion to talk about the initiative roadmap and the initiatives that are important to all of you since the Governance Review Committee really brought that up in their proposal, and you all sort of accepted it and adopted it. So we're looking forward to that discussion as well as your continued thoughtful discussions on various topics that have been important to you. So with that, I just wanted to say welcome. If you need anything, please let me know, but I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Stacy. And the next comments will be from Andy Campbell, Chair Campbell. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Walter. We have Andy Campbell, Chair of the EIM, Western EIM governing body. Thank you very much for having me at this forum. I'm really looking forward to the discussion about the roadmap. I think it's really going to be an exciting enhancement in the stakeholder process here that to help kind of inform priorities around the EIM market and the EDAM market. Had opportunity to look through the slides already, very substantive. I just certainly for myself, just seeing consensus kind of priorities really carries even more weight than regular priorities. I mean, I think me and my colleagues do read a ton of comments and so much of what's put down in writing, but this sort of additional layer of kind of collaborating within sectors really does, I think, add a lot to the impact of your voice around priorities. Looking forward to the storage discussion also. It's a great topic. I saw that appear in the priorities list quite a bit too. But thank you so much for the hard work of all the RIF liaisons and all of the members of the sectors who really contributed to this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Campbell. Anita.
I just want to The RIF is really associated with the Western Energy Imbalance Market, but I do want to point out that we have two Board of Governors here today, and they aren't typically at the RIF, so I would like to introduce Chair Jan Shori and Governor Joito. So just if you have a chance, if you don't get much contact with him, today's a great day to do that.
Thank you. Moving kind of into the introductions for this meeting, I'd like to maybe just briefly make some remarks as we are transitioning leadership at this meeting from my role as the chair into new leadership. With that, Meg McNult is moving into the chair role, coming off of the vice chair. Allie Mace from Bonneville, from BPA, will serve as the new vice chair, and Lindsay Schleckway from NV Energy, will serve as the secretary. So this will be, great new transition. We transition on an annual basis. This past year, maybe to just go through some brief highlights through my role as the chair. In reflection, I'm not one for speeches, so I'll try and keep this as short as possible. But I do think I'd like to highlight some successes that the RIF has seen. The first being kind of the implementation of the recommendations from the Governance Review Committee for the roundtable, as well as for the expansion of the RIF and the RIF's roles and responsibilities. I think that provides us with a great opportunity moving forward to allow for the RIF to provide a higher level of significant interaction with the governing body. So I hope that I and we, as we move forward as the liaison group, as well as the greater RIF community, can recognize the opportunity we have in our engagement with the CAISO through the stakeholder process, but at least for the way in which we operate as a guide for the governing body. Hope that we can take that charge and make it meaningful for both stakeholder initiatives as well as workshopping issues. In terms of the workshop successes that we've seen this year, and maybe the last thing I'll highlight is the new news that the gas gas work group is moving out of the workshop stage and into the stakeholder stage of the stakeholder process. I highlight this as an issue and an item that was initiated at a RIF meeting that stakeholders saw as an issue in the way the market is operating for gas deployment, coalesced around a problem statement, and now we're working towards solutions in a soon to be released stakeholder initiative. So I'd like to thank all of the RIF liaisons and the RIF community again in general about how we are able to use the RIF as an important tool in the stakeholder process. That's all I really had for planned remarks in my last stage of this meeting. The one thing I failed to turn over at the onset is the introduction of some new RIF liaisons. Some of the RIF liaisons are transitioning off. New RIF liaisons are transitioning on. So to the extent that we have those that have officially moved into the role as a RIF sector liaison, I'd like to maybe open the floor really quick for introduction. I'll start with Allie.
Thanks, Josh. I'm Allie Mace. I'm representing the Power Marketing Administrations. I'm at Bonneville Power Administration, where I manage our market policy and analysis organization.
And I'm John Rumble from Southern California Edison. I'm the principal manager of our market design and resource integration group within sort of a larger stakeholder affairs group, and working under Jeff Nelson. Thank you.
Thank you both. We will also be seeing a couple other transitions over the course of the next weeks or months. So stay tuned for announcements associated with folks kind of rolling off and coming back onto the RIF. Thank you all. So with that, let's get things started on the bulk of the agenda. I'm excited to have kind of two significant issues on the agenda. First, the roundtable conversation on the policy roadmap, as well as what is almost assuredly to be a recurring theme in market design, market deployment, and that being storage in the market. I think we will continue to see this as a hot topic and something that we will most likely iterate on throughout the stakeholder process and the deployment of storage in the market. So looking forward to this conversation today, and hope you all are able to learn something through the day. So let's get started. If I could, moving slides to the next slide. Okay, so I'll start with the review of process and outcomes, and then hand it over to Meg. The process for the roundtable discussion is each of the sector liaisons will give a brief overview of feedback received from their sector. From there, out of process into outcomes, we hope to kind of have a discussion on those issues, hopefully, which most likely will come to some level of coalescing around priorities from the stakeholder community, but want to have an open conversation in this meeting. And then from there, opening that up from the sector liaison report out into questions or comments from the stakeholder community themselves. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Meg, and we will get rolling.
Thanks, Josh. And if we can go to the next slide, please. I just wanted to touch briefly before we get into the sector by sector presentations on some background concerning our process. We've talked about this quite a bit at the last two public RIF meetings, but the sector liaisons have been very busy compiling feedback from members regarding themes, issues, and priorities for consideration in the 2024 policy initiatives catalog and roadmap process. And we've done this through a few different modes, including a review of the stakeholder comments that were submitted to the ISO in February, and we'd like to thank the ISO's policy team for their work in both opening up a comment process and in kind of tabulating those comments into a format that made it very easy to review for us to review them. We've also engaged in various communications and coordination with individual members of our sector. And we've solicited feedback from sector members on our process and approach for conducting today's meeting. Following today's discussion, the RIF will prepare a written report that's intended to serve as sort of the documentation of the roundtable process. It will identify various areas of priority and consensus among the sectors and discuss what appear to be the top preferences regarding stakeholder initiatives moving forward. I'd like to emphasize that the roundtable process is intended to be both iterative and annual. So we will be doing this again, we think, next year. If you have feedback or input on how we're conducting this meeting and the process that we've used to collect feedback, if you have thoughts for how this meeting should go, we'd like to hear from you. Please feel free to reach out to your sector liaisons or those of us who are in RIF leadership, and we're happy to coordinate with you. This is intended to be a process to facilitate stakeholder input, and we want to make sure that it reflects what the stakeholder community would like it to look like. So with that, if we can go to the next slide, I think we are ready to start on the sector presentations.
Okay. Hi, Lindsay Schluckaway from the EIM entity sector. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So first, we collected feedback from our sector, first by sending out an email and really just trying to inquire as to what each entity thinks about the policy catalog process and what sort of feedback we can get on this process for this RIF roundtable. And then we also compiled and summarized some of the themes that we saw in the stakeholder catalog process comments that were sent in to the CAISO. So some of the themes and comments that we also have on these slides are what we've synthesized from the comments that were sent in to CAISO. So first, the feedback that we received for the policy catalog process is that basically the EIM entities are very eager to participate in the process, and they appreciate the CAISO's recent clarity on the process for stakeholders to resubmit prior policy initiative submissions, the inclusion of the regional issues forum feedback and the working groups in the roadmap development process, and the decision-making criteria for the prioritization of policy initiatives. But we also did receive feedback that it still remains unclear how CAISO plans to measure the effectiveness of the new roadmap and the catalog process, and how urgent submissions will impact the prioritization of ongoing initiatives. Next slide. So a lot of this is the feedback that we synthesized from the comments or summarized from the comments that were submitted to CAISO. There were several themes that emerged, and I have a summary slide on the next one, but I'll quickly hit some of these. There was clear support for a continuation of the resource efficiency enhancements, and there was a focus of the de minimis tolerance band that already exists to kind of expand on that framework. And then there were also themes of looking at demand response enhancements that specifically focus on the EIM footprint. Currently, CAISO has a very robust demand response, I will say, modeling for the CAISO, the California region, and it's not necessarily as applicable to the EIM footprint. So that's something that it looked like stakeholders were interested in seeing. And then we also saw several support for the price formation, the GHG, and the gas management workshops, which are ongoing. And the support really looked like stakeholders were interested in starting the stakeholder initiatives for each of these workshops. And then some of the miscellaneous items that were also briefly mentioned were the support for storage enhancements, metering enhancements, to create clear metering guidelines, and then a request for enhancements for scheduling below PMEN, accounting for upward transition costs and settlements, and after economic commitments to lower configurations and zero DOTs causing infeasible solutions. So I will say some of these are more EIM specific enhancements, mostly for modeling and settlements from what we could see in the comments. So we can move on to the next slide. So we tried to summarize this into the continuing high priority working groups that already exist so that you can see what has already been started by CAISO and the working groups. And then also on the right, we have the new high priorities that were mentioned in the comments, so that we could just clearly bulletize those. And that's all I have. We're going to the next slide.
Matt, I think you're up next.
Yeah, so this is Matt LaCar with Pacific Gas and Electric, representing the participating transmission owner sector, along with Meg. And I'm one of the ones that's transitioning, so I'll at some point work Mr. Rumble into the conversation from our sister utility to the south. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I want to say by way of preface that the California utilities kind of sit at an interesting intersection between the California regulatory world that we see, usually the CPUC representing, where we're, regulated for the most part at the state level, and the CAISO marketplace and the CAISO transmission that CAISO, the California transmission that CAISO also operates. So all of the transmission that we own, that SoCal Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric own, the 6 cities as well, is under the ISO's operational control. So we feel tugs both ways, and what you see reflected in our submissions and in the discussion we've had in our sector is that we have priorities for enhancements or bug fixes across that spectrum. So we need CAISO to be responsive to changes in the California regulatory environment as far as the reliability role of the CAISO in operating our balancing area. And we need the CAISO and the EIM governing body to keep an eye on the development of the market and more efficient market rules. And so we haven't tried to distinguish those two here. We're not trying to prejudge how the initiatives will be classified, were they, to be launched as proposed. But recognize that, part of this whole roundtable discussion is really how do you prioritize the resources and bandwidth of the CAISO staff. And so for us, as balancing area participating transmission owners, it's critical to us that some of that bandwidth continue to focus on our reliability needs, our resource adequacy program, which continues to evolve in California, as you may have heard, and as well, right, that the market works smoothly for us as well. So I think that's all I want to say here. We can go on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. So for my company, Pacific Gas and Electric, we submitted, I did want to say one more thing. In terms of the volume of submissions, folks who've been tracking this process for a while, I view this as a real validation for the process changes and the roundtable, that so many parties were interested to put so many ideas into the mix this time. So speaking only for my company, I will say, we have been reluctant over the last few years, given how little has moved forward out of the catalog, to write new submissions. It's a lot of work, doesn't always see a lot of result out of it. The fact that we've got 4 new submissions from just our company is a real reflection of the optimism that has been engendered about the possibility of new initiatives actually emerging. So kudos to everybody for reinvigorating this process, and particularly the CAISO. Okay, the 4 proposals that PG&E put in, so I don't want to go into too much depth, in part because I'm not a subject matter expert in our company on each of these, or any of them. But I will say the first one, so I think this one was shared also by the Large Scale Solar Association. Solar resources, have difficulty bidding in to the ancillary services market. They are capable of offering things like regulation up to the availability of the physical resource. And the challenge is, the forecast that you have in day ahead of solar production may not be realized. You can't put in ancillary service bid today for a forecast or a partial amount of a resource's forecast capacity. And so what we're looking at is, creating the opportunity for those solar resources that would be able to and like to bid in some portion of their capacity into ancillary services. We know it's going to show up to some degree. We can't necessarily predict that 100% of the solar capacity will show up. And so we need a mechanism to do that in the ancillary service space. The second proposal, I'm going to really hand off to the panel that's coming up because our expert Alva Svoboda is on that panel. But in California, there is a policy directive to procure some of the resource adequacy capacity as long duration energy storage, defined as longer than 4-hour lithium ion batteries, which predominate in the market today. That's intended to stimulate development of that technology and commercialization of longer duration batteries, which would be a huge benefit to the market. The problem that we're poking at here is that many of the CAISO rules for bidding and dispatching storage assume a 4-hour battery. And so, things like the look ahead period and the bidding rules need to evolve to accommodate the volume of long duration storage that we hope to see. Third proposal is around demand response. And this is actually, currently unique to California, but the tariff is available to other EIM areas as well. And this is something California has, in particular, very strict customer privacy rules. We're not allowed to share customer end-use metering information without the customer's written permission, except under exigent circumstances. And so the idea here is, in order to measure the effectiveness of a demand response program, CAISO would like to compare the participating load to a control group of non-participating customers, and they're not able to do that currently because we can't pull the data from a randomly enough selected control group and give it to CAISO because we don't have those customers' permission to do so. So we're suggesting some ways forward that would revise the methodology to allow, some more accurate estimation of demand response effectiveness for those programs, which currently, again, those are California programs that participate. And then the fourth one, for those who've been involved in the EDAM process, you may have heard about this. So there's a concern about the way the self-scheduled or economic exports are out of EDAM into non-EDAM areas are handled differently depending on whether it's an EIM entity or a CAISO BAA export. And we want to plug that hole basically so that CAISO can maintain BAA reliability and not export its way into a deficiency. So I'll leave that one there. Okay, now I'm going to pivot because I'm a sector representative and not just a PG&E representative. So the 831 and energy storage resources, we're going to hear about that on the panel later. Do you know, Meg? Yeah, it is included in the panel discussion. So maybe I'll punt to the panel for that one rather than attempting to mouth somebody else's proposal, if that's okay. Sorry, San Diego. Next slide, please. And then I will now turn it over to my incoming replacement, John Rumble, to talk about SoCal Edison's.
Thank you, Matt. Excuse me. We may be sister utilities, but it is always sort of interesting how we look at the same thing slightly differently. Edison has put forth 4 initiatives into the catalog, and these were pre-existing initiatives that we've resubmitted as part of the new process. The fourth, similar to what Matt was discussing in terms of aligning the energy storage bid cap with FERC order 831, that's probably self-explanatory and will be addressed a little bit later today. Another of our, excuse me, submissions is around ancillary services pay for performance and the accuracy calculations. And this really has much more to do with, how CAISO actually evaluates regulation pay for performance accuracy or calculations. And one of the, I think, big issues that we see is that these are often very small quantities, but for example, gas-fired generation often has very large, PMAX, and even, similarly PMIN, and necessarily there's some question, we have some question as to whether or not you can actually calculate very small awards with such large plants that are providing these services. And so that's the first of our submissions that we have resubmitted. Second, and really the next two are with regard to demand response and RDR in how they participate in the market. The first is that in the 15-minute market and 60-minute market, the bid option doesn't actually have the start times accurately modeled, and it's a hard-coded startup time rather than what's contained in the RDT. And whereas in the 5-minute market, it is actually what's contained in the RDT. And so we'd like some evaluation of whether or not that can be fixed so that more DR can be participating in the 15 and 60-minute markets. And the second issue that we have submitted around RDRR is about the sort of discrete dispatch limit of 100 megawatts for DRs. And we actually have very large portfolios, demand response, and it's very difficult to get to a sort of meet that discrete limit. Okay, here's 100 megawatts. Well, if you've got well more than that in a sort of demand response portfolio, how do you select out in order to meet that max? And so we'd like to CAISO to take a look at how potentially you can increase that min or that max dispatch limit. And I will leave it for there. Thank you.
I can, thanks, John and Matt. I can quickly touch on the last item, which was a joint submittal by the 6 cities together with the California Community Choice Association and Shell. We are interested in a holistic review of the ISO's rules for calculating an allocation of maximum import capability, which is the metric that is used to determine whether import resources within the CAISO can qualify for resource adequacy. We're looking for a holistic reevaluation of these elements of the MIC program, and believe that this aligns well with some of what the ISO is evaluating in its RA modeling and program design initiative, which is ongoing. Next slide, please. With that, I think we're ready to pivot to the consumer-owned utilities sector overview. Lauren?
Thanks. Lauren Tenney-Dennison. I'm one of the COU liaisons with Doug, who you'll be hearing from this afternoon as he moderates the storage panel. So this process, maybe before we jump into these slides, just highlighting, I thought Matt did a good job of talking about some of the diversity in their sector. The COU sector, we have some interesting diversity as well. So our sector is all the consumer-owned utilities that are in EIM BA or in the CAISO BA, but aren't EIM entities, PTOs. So that's sort of inside and outside. Are you an EIM participant or are you in the BA? Creates some differences in the ways that folks see or think about or prioritize the issues. And so it was really great to be able to have those conversations as part of this process. So if we could jump to the next slide. This process as well, some of the most rich and robust discussion we had with our sector was actually about the process and some of the higher level strategic objectives. So we'll probably spend a little bit more time on those, but the process feedback, a few things to highlight. A lot of support for this new process, both the RIF roundtable piece and the new structure that the CAISO is using. I think we're having a different approach and be able to have broader discussions than we have in the past. So there was a lot of appreciation for that. There was more information sought as we get into this discussion. There's, a limited amount of resources. We can't prioritize everything, number one. So how do we have the discussion about trade-offs? How do we weight, how much bandwidth does it take to take on this issue or that issue? And how do we have an iterative discussion through that process so that stakeholders are really able to understand what they give up if they're putting this on the sideline and able to tackle, some other priority issues. There needs to be a process for fast tracking. That was one thing that came out of our discussion. The annual check-ins and development of the roadmap is very helpful, but sometimes things come up and need to be done quickly. So just making sure we all understand how that would happen. There's also an interest in better understanding how the topics flow from work group development to a formal initiative. I know we're just getting to this phase where that will start happening, where the work groups will be sort of passing on that ideas and objectives from the work groups into those more formal initiatives. But as we get there, it's really helpful to understand how that's all going to work. There were some concerns raised in the group about times where in the roadmap or in the catalog, the initial scoping of an issue included some topic of specific interest for the stakeholder. And then as time went on, that scope morphed a little bit, and then some of the important aspects of that scope were kind of put aside for later. So I think sometimes that naturally happens through just the development of initiatives, but just better understanding how to give input to that, how to influence those changes, how to bring something back up into the roadmap if something does get tabled, where it sort of sounds like originally it was within the scope of the initial initiative, but has since been, sort of whittled off to the side. And one suggestion that came out of our group as well was identifying sectors that support each of the initiatives. Some of these, I think you'll see through hearing from all of us today, there's quite a few that have a lot of support across all the sectors, but identifying, especially if there's sectors where there's one or two, or issues where there's one or two sectors that show specific interest. That way you can make sure to check back with those sectors. Did this issue address your concerns? Or is this still a high priority issue? Gives a little bit more of a direct touch point to making sure that folks that really spoke out in support of some of these initiatives are tracking those. We could go to the next slide. So these two topics, we had a lot of discussion in our group about were these initiatives in and of themselves, and what we ended up talking through was that these two areas would be really helpful to discuss on all policy initiatives. And the first is, you'll see in parentheses, we called it seems, because that seems to be the word of the day, but really incongruencies with policies or market designs where and we've been talking about a lot about market seams where we're talking market to market or different resource adequacy programs, things like that. But there's ways that shows up within the BA as well. So within each initiative, making sure that there's time and space given for thinking about how that, whether policies within the market are consistent, policies with other programs or markets, where might that create some challenges, and really building that into each discussion as opposed to necessarily having that entirely be a separate issue. There may be, you see in our last bullet here, there may be some specific issues that become their own initiatives later, specifically thinking about interface pricing. But, just in general, there's a lot of area our sector was seeing for this to be built into the discussion in an ongoing way. The second piece is better clarity on the delineation of the role that CAISO is taking in the discussion. CAISO is in a position where they have two very important roles that they have to represent and participate in all of these discussions, both as the market operator and as a participating BAA. And this was a really interesting topic to discuss in our group with the diversity that we have, because folks were sort of seeing it from different sides, of we want to hear more of this or maybe more of that. But there was a lot of agreement about that there could be benefit from raising specifically as we have those discussions when CAISO staff is bringing up an issue. Are they bringing it up and evaluating a concern as the BAA, as the market operator. In a lot of areas, they might have to weigh and consider concerns on one side and the other side that are somewhat conflicting. And I'm sure that a lot of that goes on behind the scenes and has to be weighted in the decision, but just making that a little bit more clear for participants to see the challenge, all the challenges that CAISO staff is trying to address when they take actions, both as the market operator and as the BA. We could go to the next slide. So our last slide here is talking about the specific areas of interest. And again, I think there will be a lot of consistency across groups. And these were represented very well in the comments that were submitted from our sector. But just to highlight a few, and maybe we called this first box a continuation. I think it probably depends on how you slice it, if it's a continuation, or maybe some of these would be new initiatives, but they're new initiatives coming out of ongoing work groups. A lot of support for the work that's going on in the price formation work group and making sure that that comes out and flows into an initiative continuing into next year, highlighting scarcity pricing and market power mitigation default energy bids. A lot of interest in storage enhancements. I know we'll talk more about that this afternoon. One thing to definitely flag coming from our sector is when we talk about bid cap limitations, making sure that hydro is considered and how that fits in as a storage resource. Also the opportunity for real-time scheduling enhancements for storage as well. A lot and great support for, again, this work that's going on in the GHG coordination working group, the gas resource management working group, and really interest in seeing those continue on and turn into initiatives outside of the working groups. We did, I thought it was interesting, Matt, when you said that you didn't, maybe we committed not crime, but the misstep here in delineating some things that might be outside the EIM or EDAM, because that is part of the process to go ahead and evaluate those. But things that we saw come in from our sector that we think are probably a little bit more on the outside of the WEIM, but we wanted to make sure to highlight a lot of interest in transmission planning, RA considerations, and enhancements to congestion revenue rights. And there's a lot within all of those that we wanted to make sure this, while we're in a WEIM forum today, we wanted to make sure that those don't fall off the table. I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Lauren. Do we want to move to Kathleen?
Great, thank you. Kathleen Colbert. I'm here for the IPP and marketer sector, independent power producers and marketer sector. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with both kind of an intro to our sector, but also our process, which I like that we all kind of did that. The sector that I represent with my co-liaison, who can't be here today, Ian White, is a very diverse sector. And it's also voluntary, so I will also throw out an advertisement of, if you think that you fit into any of what I'm about to describe and you're not a member of our sector, please do reach out to Sienna Levy and we will get you added. Participating in a RIF sector is voluntary, so it is something where we kind of have to have a mutual interest of you asking to be on the sector list. We will incorporate you. The liaisons are also volunteers. And I think that is part of why what comes out of it is a little bit nuanced from what you might see in a stakeholder process. Our sector has 76 different companies, many more participants, because some companies have more than one representative that wants to participate in the sector. And so we had a unique challenge in that we had to work with 76 entities to try to come up with both what we put forward in the catalog and are going to present today. I wanted to start with, there's kind of a connecting or holistic belief, like what connects these 76 companies? We have a holistic belief in well-functioning, competitive wholesale electricity markets, and that they are the best foundation to reliably power our grid at the lowest cost while fostering innovation that is necessary to achieve critical environmental and reliability goals across the West. Within these, and this says 77, I think I updated the top link. We had one company step down. recently. Within these 76 entities, we have competitive power providers, also called independent power providers, operating a diverse mix of resources from gas to wind to solar, storage, co-located and hybrid assets. We also have competitive electricity service providers, competitive retailers providing load to customers. We have power marketers, intertype traders, and locally. We also have financial marketers, developers, and we have trade associations that represent all of the above. So this sector is incredibly diverse, not only in the type of market participation, the type of entity, some are very small, some are larger, but also in the segments, right? I have load serving entities, I have power providers, I have financial marketers that are kind of focused on providing services for hedging rather than thinking of them as providing the supply. Just an incredibly diverse sector. And go to the next slide. So how did we try to manage this to bring something of value to everyone here? We approached this effort with the perspective of starting with, are we talking about initiatives or are we talking about scope of work? And at least in our sector, we decided that this policy catalog and roadmap process is discussing scope, not initiatives. Initiatives are vehicles by which scope get managed through a process, but scope are the particular scope items or challenges that the market is facing. We developed a list of 40 issues impacting our very diverse sector with scopes of work we believe are largely can be incorporated into currently planned initiatives. And that's why I'm spending a little time explaining how we saw the world as this effort was about identifying scope, and that yes, we recognize there are initiatives that will be prioritized, but many of those initiatives actually can incorporate these high priority scope items that we are discussing. To get to that list of 40, we identified items in the previous catalog that are continuing to be issues for the sector. The second thing we did is we revised previous catalog items no longer relevant into more relevant issue statements, or even kind of revised existing some of the existing catalog items that maybe were more focused on a specific like EIM phrasing. And so I think, Lindsay, one of the ones that you talked about was the settlements around a decommitment. And so that was one that my sector really found interesting and thought needed to still be contained in the catalog, but would want it expanded to kind of think more about how just generally the real-time market does make changes from an advisory into a binding state, and how that maybe isn't only affecting gas resources, but could also be affecting storage resources or any of the NGR resources that are impacted by that. So there's a way we can start to look at what was in the previous catalog, and make it a little bit more relevant by broadening that scope. The third thing we did was develop new issue statements or scope items, and a lot of those were the storage ones that have culminated up. I provided a link for anyone who wants to see the list from the IPP and marketing sector. Next slide. Okay, so now the hard part. How did we get to a slide that we could help provide some context on priority for these 40 different scope items that our sector still believe all are relevant today? We did this through a survey or voting, informal voting mechanism. Issued that to our sector representatives, asked them to vote. We did get a pretty decent response. I was very pleased with our sector's engagement. Got those responses back, and then we rank ordered all of those scope items based on that response. We inquired, is this no priority, low priority, medium priority, or high priority? And then what culminated out of here and what you see on this slide is really a mix of medium and high priorities. The things that came out of this list, I say the highest ranked issue was the governance enhancements. And that is really thinking about, as we're developing and maturing as a market, how does this stakeholder process need to evolve? How does the RIF engage with the existing stakeholder process? How do urgent or fast-tracked issues get taken up? How do we make sure that there's a fair representation of stakeholders and people feel like they have a way to engage with their voice? Kind of a lot of in one kind of omnibus idea, but it was the highest ranked item that was in our catalog. The second is intertie trading enhancements. On the right, so in my, I guess I should have oriented that what we did in this slide is we bucketed those scope items into kind of categories, which could be initiatives, and then a tentative designation of what we believe it might be, but I should have said, I apologize for we're not trying to prejudge that outcome of a designation, but that was our intuition. And then the number of scope items. So for governance, it was 1, a stakeholder effort. For intertie trading enhancements, there were 5 scope items that were identified. 2 of those were flagged as high priorities for the sector. 3 probably have merit and might be worth addressing with these other high priority items, especially if the implementation is feasible. So that was another thing we talked about as a sector. It's kind of difficult to prejudge whether or not we should only be advancing quote unquote urgent issues when there may be 1 or 2 other that are related to that very specific item. And so you might be able to win a couple low-hanging fruit, right? And so why would we want to take that off the table? So we struggled with that too. So this is just another way to try to indicate what we struggled with as a sector of how to provide this kind of feedback. The 2 urgent ones, though, are load conformance impacts on intertie transactions. That would be load conformance in residual unit commitment, hour ahead scheduling process, the 15-minute market, real time, the 5-minute market, not so much. But those very important scheduling processes that lead up to our WEIM, 15-minute market and 5-minute market, and how the load conformance is impacting intertie transactions, how it's impacting pricing in those instances as well. The second high priority urgent item is bidding on CAISO or external WEIM interties. This has an element of EDAM as well. So under an EDAM, what is the intertie trading on the EDAM interties? This would be another good example, and not to, but I'm going to tag on to some of my other liaisons of, I noticed this one did not come out as like a consensus across the sectors, but I think the intertie trading enhancements would be one that makes perfect, this is a seams issue predominantly, and my sector is made up of entities that transact not only within this market, but potentially other markets, and today in bilateral markets. So the bilateral external to California, the CAISO market, that seems is very live and present for our sector today. Under a world in which there may be new seams coming into play, planning for those seams appropriately is a high priority item, and that's why you see this category as number 2 for our sector, but maybe not rising to the same level for other sectors, but it would be one that we might be willing to sponsor if something like that was taken up. The third category is non-generator resource enhancements. Also flagging, this also includes hydro. So this is limited energy storage resources as well as hydro resources in our market, and how those resources can bid, the mitigation rules applied to them, essentially their ability to manage their use limitations, full stop. Fallback modeling, whether or not the physical characteristics of new technologies are being adequately represented in the market, and outage improvements for storage. Those were the 3 or 4 or urgent scope items out of the 16 items that were flagged for storage. The others are important to the sector, but we recognize that we needed to prioritize, and the remaining 12 fit into more of a medium and low priority. But again, could be some low-hanging fruit you might want to tackle at the same time. Next, we have price formation enhancements, very similar, I think, to what you've heard from the rest. Scarcity pricing, fast start pricing within the current price formation working groups, want to see those advanced. Greenhouse gas functionality impacting on pricing and market outcomes. Again, that's an ongoing working group. We'd really want to see that advanced. And emergency assistance energy pricing. So resource sufficiency enhancements, phase 3 scope, which has been planned, but is unclear when it's going to be tackled. We want to be clear that that moving emergency energy assistance into a priced product is a critical priority for our sector. And then finally, this one's a little outside the scope of WEIM, so we did want to nod our head to that as well. But transmission planning process enhancements. Again, my sector has IPPs, but a lot of developers. So a lot of entities that are actually very concerned about the state of the grid from a transmission perspective and wants to make sure that we are building out our transmission to support the resource development that we are currently underway, so that we can maintain reliability. And I think with that, we are done. So thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. I think next up is the PIO and consumer advocate sector, and I think we are going to have Jamie Stemitson from Montana.
Meg, actually, I'm available for 2 minutes.
Great.
Thank you, if that's okay. Sorry.
Okay. Terrific, Vijay. Let's go to the next slide, and you and Jamie can go ahead and present.
I'll let Jamie go first, please.
Okay, Vijay, I'll do that. Hi, I'm Jamie Stemitson. I'm with the Montana Consumer Council, and I am the consumer advocate representative for our sector. Our sector is both composed of consumer advocates and public interest organizations. So I represent primarily the state level consumer advocates. Every state in the West has some sort of statutory consumer advocate for residential and small commercial ratepayers, and also large consumers of energy also fit into our category, particularly the California Large Energy Consumers Association is in it. So I'm going to go talk to you about our policy submittals, and the first one comes from the Public Advocate's Office of California, and these are all transmission related. So their first submittal was they want to allow competitive bidding on transmission projects over 100 kilovolts. So they think that projects between 100 kV and 200 kV should be eligible for eligible for competitive bidding if clear, measurable, and regional benefits exist. CAISO should be the one to determine these benefits, and the project must provide to qualify. They also think that they should add a schedule incentive clause to the standard terms in the approved project sponsor agreement, because timely completion of projects can help maintain costs, maintain grid reliability, and fulfill climate goals. And they also would wish to add an enforcement of cost containment terms to the APSA. Because right now there's no sort of legally binding terms in there, and they believe if there's legally binding enforceable in there, that will keep costs down, and that no cost overruns that should be allowed if they're not accepted in the Appendix E. And then FERC will have the full authority to enforce these measures. Next slide, please. So this is the submittal from the California Large Energy Consumers Association, and these are related to demand response. They would want to allow reliability demands response resources to reflect minimum on times greater than 1 hour to more accurately reflect RDRR times runs in CAISO's market optimization and dispatch. They also want to address the issue of RDRR minimum on time not being considered an economic evaluation of dispatch. And this comes out of a June CPUC decision, which allows CAISO to use RDRR resources upon declaration of an energy emergency alert watch 1, which will allow CAISO to enable bids for the resource into the market before this declaration. And there was concerns among the group that increased chances of economic dispatch and attrition of customers from retail programs, which would reduce RDRR capacity. They also need resources' physical operating characteristics to be accurately reflected in order to be effectively optimized dispatch of RDRR resources. Next slide, please. They also wish to explore methods to consider fixed costs in economic dispatch decisions of RDRR resources, because these costs aren't volume metrics, they're more on a fixed cost base, so they need that to accurately be reflected in the dispatch parameters. Next slide, please. And other priorities for my subsector particularly would be SEAMS issues and minimizing impacts. I think that's particularly important. We've already discussed SEAMS. And I think with the expansion of Market Plus in particular, that we want to just make sure that each market structure is not leaning on one another. And also, we're particularly interested in market functionality. And well, I just basically want markets that are reflective of the current, loads and generation mix and public policy. That way, the markets are efficient and they result in the lowest possible prices. And that's all I got. Next slide, please, Vijay.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and thank you to the EIM governing body and all the attendees present. I'm sorry I could not be there. This is an unexpected conflict that I am dealing with. Just a quick reminder on the public interest sector, because often many people wonder about who we are. Of course, we partner with the ratepayer advocates, and therefore we're part of the joint family of the consumer advocates. And we often have a lot of positions in common. But we're really clean energy advocates, public interest research and advocate organizations that want good markets to be designed, that prevent externalities that you cannot pay for, and also making sure that non-governmental organizations and academia can give their input in ways that's appropriate. Our position is very clear: good market structures that reflect public interest goals. Even though I was the chair 2 years ago of the RIF, I was very grateful to have all the RIF liaisons who were helping bring different perspectives to the table. And that's what we want to do, is bring the best information, explore efficiencies, look at innovation, look at fairness of pricing resources, and making sure that our grid is responding to not just changes of decarbonization, but also how public policies and reliability changes matter. I just want to remind everybody of that clarification or perspective there. Next slide, please. And thank you, Sienna and Meg, for all your work. So when I did my short straw poll, first in December, then again in late January, and then finally again, some of these issues have come up pretty clearly. First, I want to thank the CalISO staff who have really tried to get the policy initiatives catalog process to be agile and find ways for stakeholder feedback. I actually agree with Lindsay and some of the other liaison community peers of mine. How do we measure the effectiveness of the roadmap? That's not clear to me, at least. That's a personal opinion. I dug deep into it last month. Another area is, how do we prioritize the process? 2.5 years ago, when I was the chair, I took on a good challenge that Kathleen and some others offered. How do we prioritize the EIM priorities? What is more important? We took it on. We had a bit of a uphill battle in that area. So understanding how do we prioritize and you're transparent about what CalISO stuff takes on will be important. And then I don't want to go down this big laundry list, but there are 6 to 7 items that are really important to the public interest community. And 3 of them especially have been very strongly communicated to me. One is governance and the joint authority. How do we make the EDAM structure align and work to make sure that the CalISO role as a staff, as a BA versus a market operator is sorted out? The GAG-related price formation is a very important matter. And then the demand response. I still cannot forget August 16th, I think, 2021, how demand response and economic demand response played a very big role in helping California ratepayers and citizens avoid load shedding and have significant benefits. So the more we can work on demand response to be an economic incentive-based product, that will be valuable for everybody. And there are other 3 or 4 areas that we see a big important role, including non-generating resource that Jamie and I both got the email from a couple of entities that didn't know where they fit, but they wanted NGRs to be reflected better by CalISO staff. So I will stop there, but an important area for future is interregional planning for transmission and how that plays in with the different business models. Thank you again to Holly, Sienna, and a big congratulations to Josh and Meg, and super congratulations to Meg and Ali for taking on the new role.
Thanks, Vijay. Ali, I think you're up.
All right, great. Let's go to the next slide. I have the advantage of being the last sector, so in many cases, we'll just get to say what the other sector said. There will be a lot of themes here. So before I jump into the topics, just a quick orientation on the Power Marketing Administration sector, or Federal Power Marketing Administration sector. We are composed of two organizations, Bonneville Power Administration and Western Area Power Administration. Bonneville, of course, is a participant in the EIM, and two of WAPA's regions are participants as well. I get the lucky job of gathering from only two entities, which is fortunate when I hear about 76. It makes that job sound a lot easier. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to start, like the others, with just a note on the process. First of all, the sector really appreciates the opportunity for engagement and to provide initiative proposals to the CAISO. I would echo the optimism that Matt expressed about the willingness to spend time writing submissions. It felt like a great invitation and opening with optimism that this would be a good opportunity for our voices to be heard on identifying and elevating topics. We did have one kind of detailed sequencing change recommendation in the process. We found that we felt like we would have benefited from seeking the input from the sectors after the new policy initiatives were due to CAISO. Rather than kind of during the policy initiative comment formation, because then we would have had more time and a better opportunity just to review what else others had submitted and prioritize those. So some of the prioritizations don't necessarily reflect the new initiatives or proposals that were included. Let's go to the next slide. So to start with, looking at the current roadmap, we support continuing with the current roadmap as planned. Really no feedback on changes. We would emphasize that the price formation enhancements working group and initiative is high priority for our organizations. We have been really pleased with how that's been going and encourage continuation of that as high priority. Also, as a few others have mentioned, launching the resource efficiency evaluation enhancements, phase 3 is important to address those failure penalties and look at the elements. There were a number of elements of phase 2 that were put on hold in order to get other elements implemented quickly by last summer. And we'd like to make sure that those are revisited in phase 3. And then to support continuing the greenhouse gas coordination group as well has been a good effort in our views. So let's go on to the next slide with the new initiatives. So there were a few new initiative priorities for 2025. This first one is really, as others have said, a cross-cutting topic more than a new initiative. So addressing seams with a specific focus on the operating time horizon. And understanding that seams with other markets is sort of a shifting target right now as more information comes out about future market footprints in the West. So our collective recommendation would be just a request for CAISO to resource and support the seams work as that information arises and the work that needs to be done there becomes clearer. As has been mentioned multiple times, looking at the non-generated resources bid cap under the FERC 831 conditions. As Kathleen mentioned, hydro is considered an NGR and participates in the EIM as an NGR, so is subject to those bid caps as well. So I know this is related to price formation, but want to emphasize that importance for initiatives, whether it comes through price formation or another venue. And then both entities supported Bonneville. We submitted a few new initiatives that I won't get into the details on, but we're about improving some operational and settlement functionality in the EIM, just with the goals of making things run smoother with better, more timely information. So both entities supported that as well. And that wraps up the PMA input. Thank you.
So thanks to everyone in the sectors for sort of presenting your issues and high priority proposals for stakeholder initiatives and identifying themes and process improvements. We would like to hear from anyone either here in the room or on the phone who is not identified with a sector. We think that there are not many people who fall or many parties who fall into this category, but if there is anyone who is not specifically within a sector and who would like to speak to any of the topics we've touched on in the sector presentations, now would be a good time. So I don't see anyone in the room. Is there anyone on the phone who might fall within this category? Ah, thank you.
Hi, it's Alicia Vinoy from Ohm Connect, and I just wanted to speak to one of the proposals that came from the demand response sector. I appreciate the opportunity to participate here today. So one of our proposals was a device level measurement for settlement because CAISO currently has limited visibility into the quantity and types of devices behind the meter that can respond to market signals. And so we have proposed a device level measurement for settlement as it will give CAISO more visibility. Also, current smart meter based rules limit participation to a single demand response provider. And as the ecosystem of devices that are able to respond to demand response events increases, this is going to really limit the participation of those devices due to interoperability levels. So we see this as being a great opportunity to increase the quantity and megawatts available to respond to events. Please check on our proposal posted in the comments, and thank you for allowing us to participate today.
Thanks very much. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to address a topic that is that hasn't been ventilated within a sector or on the phone? Deanna, can you tell if anyone's on the phone?
Hi, thank you. This is Colin Smith from LEAP, a demand response provider. And similar to Ohm Connect, or Alicia from Ohm Connect's proposal, the two of us submitted joint proposals through the submission process for the demand response industry, which we were not sure what sector this industry would fit in under. It did not seem like it had a clear home. And so I appreciate the opportunity to speak up in this comment period. LEAP also supports the device level metering proposal put forward by Ohm Connector, just discussed by Alicia. We also put forward another proposal for the establishment of a new type of demand response product called the Modified Proxy Demand Resource, or MPDR product, which would allow battery exports or exports from behind the meter batteries to be credited towards demand response performance in the capacity markets. At the moment, the CAISO's business manual does not allow for exports from behind the meter batteries to be treated towards a demand response performance. The battery's output is zeroed out at the customer meter. So any export past the load at the household will not be credited towards that resource's performance, which requires behind the meter batteries to significantly derate resource nominations in the capacity markets, and leaves a lot of capacity on the table that's not accessible in the markets. This is a pretty big issue, or there's hundreds of megawatts, soon to be thousands of megawatts of behind the meter batteries in California. We estimate that a change such as the modified demand proxy, a resource change would enable another 600 megawatts of potential capacity from residential storage alone. By 2030, it would grow to be almost 1.4 gigawatts of additional capacity in the residential sector, even more coming from the CNI and bidirectional EVs. which could add conservatively another 5 gigawatts of capacity to the markets just by allowing exports to be credited towards performance. The proposal or the mechanism that we proposed to address or credit performance towards batteries is one that we're pretty excited about. The modified proxy demand resource is not actually our idea. It was initially put together by the California Public Utility Commission, and so has regulatory support. But basically, the concept would be for demand response performance to be measured not at the individual customer meter level or the resource level, but at the sublap level. And so if batteries on the distribution side of the sublap export to the grid, as long as the load at that sublap itself is still positive, then the demand response resources performance would be registered, and the demand response providers compensated for their battery exports. Because the load at the sublap would remain positive overall, there would be no risk of backflow for this power into the transmission system, and so likely should not require a deliverability study. And overall, it would just look like a increased reduction in load to the market operator at the sublap level. So like I said, really excited about this proposal. It has support from regulators, at least in California. It has a lot of the other issues at the distribution level and in terms of economics are already largely solved in California. It really is just action at the wholesale level that is needed, we feel, to push it forward. So thank you again for taking the time to listen to this proposal and for inviting us to speak here. I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you very much. This is Kathleen Colbert from the IPP and marketer sector. I appreciate both the comments from Alicia and from Colin. I'd like to respond and say you are in our so you are eligible to be in the IPP and marketer sector. Demand response providers and distributed energy resource providers are in the IPP and marketer sector as a eligibility. And just add one additional nuance of, you heard some sectors said they went through and culled the initiative submissions from entities that could qualify. It is very difficult for our sector to do that because of the magnitude. I mentioned I have 76 voluntarily committed entities that have asked to have their voice participate. So we manage our sector differently. And so I apologize if it sounds like you both submitted submissions. We'll take a look at them and we'll figure out how to get you guys on the list. We have sector calls. So we have conversations on a regular basis. We try to percolate issues up that way. And so I think in the forward, we'll be able to fix that gap. So thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. And so is there anyone else on the WebEx or on the phone at this point? Sienna, can you tell? All right, then why don't we go to public comment? And I think the way that we had talked about doing this, Josh, we were going to do any questions or comments among the liaisons, and then, do you want to?
Yeah, I think that starting with the liaisons, moving into public comment, but I think we were also maybe going to start off with addressing maybe some of the more common themes. So seeing if we've got it right to begin with in terms of what we think we've all heard. I think we could all coalesce around some pretty easy common themes. Maybe starting with there, seeing if we've got it right, and then go from there into some comments from the liaisons and then comments from the room and from the phone. I've jotted down a couple. Maybe if I could start, and then we can go from there. The easy ones that I've seen, and let's start at 30,000 foot level, right, is a continuation of the big three workshops, right? So the GHG gas deployment and price formation theme. I think we can all kind of agree that those are high priority issues. Storage, demand response are two additional, and maybe even breaking down storage to a somewhat lower level, right? The idea of impacts and issues for or from storage at a utility scale versus storage at a distribution or in demand response. So we've got some separation there between the different technologies and the way that the market or the way in which the market either deploys or views them, kind of as a theme. One thing that also there's a common theme that may need some unwinding, and some CAISO may already have some thoughts on this. Liaisons may also have some thoughts in the combination of some storage themes and the price formation issue in particular. The idea of the bid cap on NGRs very specifically is an issue. I'd say maybe more so on the utility scale storage side of the table. But I think that those are three, let's say, storage, demand response, and the continuation of the three workshops are pretty significant themes that I heard that seemed relevant and important. Maybe a question that may or may not need an answer. One thing I thought that was interesting was this idea of fast tracking. I heard that from at least two different sectors. The idea of fast tracking, and I'm assuming that that is outside of the realm of exigent circumstances. So the idea of the idea of a process for an in-between a process, a planned initiative that ultimately needs to be fast-tracked, but is or does fall outside of a exigent circumstance type exemption. Also seems like, at least from a process perspective and less so on an issue-specific perspective, also seems to be something that could use attention. So those were my thoughts. I would love to expand or ask if that seems about right, and if there's anything else that I may have missed.
I'm happy to react to that. Just initially, I think that is right. And just in looking at some of the preliminary pre-prepared materials that the sectors had put together, do we want to go to the slides 32, 33, 34, where we had kind of put together some initial
Yeah, that works great.
on this? Yeah, if we could go to slide, and give you the number. How about 33? We can skip ahead. So, Josh, yeah, I think you hit on the support for the existing initiatives. The one I would add is the RA modeling and program design. I think we've heard from a couple of sectors on different topics that may fit within that ongoing initiative process. Stepping back a bit and talking about a couple of broader themes, obviously SEAMS is one that several sectors identified as an area that kind of cuts across different initiatives and that is going to have an augmented need to consider sort of as different market rules become more formalized throughout the West. I would also add reconciliation of the ISO's roles as market operators and its role as a balancing authority or transmission operator. We heard from the CAISO PTO sector, for example, that there's one topic that's of particular concern related to participation in EIM and EDAM around export rules, for example. And I think we heard from the COU sector that this is likewise an area of concern for entities within your sector. And I would note that you have entities, as you said, both within the CAISO footprint and external to the CAISO footprint. So I think there are two dimensions of that issue that you all are seeing. In the next slide. So in terms of new initiatives, we also heard from multiple sectors regarding re-engagement on the resource efficiency evaluation. Josh, I think you may have mentioned that one in your summary. And then also issues around intertie trading. I think we had 2 sectors address topics related to that, and then transmission planning process enhancements. So that's kind of how the pre-prepared materials look to me, and I think that fits with some of the conversation that we've had already. But very interested in hearing from others and the public regarding other topics.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Meg. And I don't want to hog the mic anymore. So let's maybe turn it over to any conversation, questions, thoughts on what you've heard thus far. So maybe starting with the liaisons.
I think just one thing that we talked about the issues and the topics a lot in the summary. I heard a few people also mention the question of prioritization and the importance of talking about and getting transparency around how the initiatives are prioritized and how that process will work. So for some, that was a common process suggestion as well.
Kathleen Colbert, IPP and marketer sector. Yeah, and maybe just to lean in a little harder, just because of what is printed on the slides, I think it would be good to, when we think about our report, I saw across many of the pre-prepared, but also in our discussion today, really a focus on the stakeholder process, like very loosely, broadly. How does this fit into the stakeholder process, and kind of taking a step back and taking a more holistic view and talking about what kind of clarifications, whether it's training, whether it's clarity on the process, how to engage, where to engage, things like that. And how can we just make it easier to be an engaged and productive stakeholder in this process? I did hear that very resoundingly. So I think we should, that would be my one addition to both our discussion and submissions from the different sectors. The other thing I noted when I looked through the pre-prepared, I didn't actually hear it called out in discussion. So if it's all right, I'd like to ask a question. I saw in a couple different sectors a reference to the market power mitigation and DEB scope of work, and I saw it nested under price formation. That is right now a working group. So moving that into a policy process, that specific element, I recognize we may have discussions, but I'm not sure it's being called out as a unique track in the price formation. So for the sectors who included that, can you help us understand kind of what your vision is? Because you included it with the ongoing, but it almost seems like a new scope. Can you unpack that?
For the EIM entity sector, and specifically to the hydro operators, the idea behind the NGR bid cap issue and the tie-in with market power mitigation and opportunity costs is the link between the two, at least as I view it. So that there may be opportunity to separate. But there also may be opportunity to expand within the price formation workshop to include this particular issue.
That's incredibly helpful. And, for context on the IPP and marketer side, I think we see that in our table in the NGR enhancements, bidding and mitigation rules. So when we talked about that, both on the bidding of how do you bid, whether it's in normal or stress condition, and the mitigation, did it include a concept of market power mitigation? Just in our conversations, we kind of saw it as a separate issue to price formation. So I wanted to tease that out. We don't care where it lives going forward in any initiative. Again, scopes that should be taken up somewhere, but that's very helpful. Thank you.
And maybe a little more color. I think we're using the idea that in the price formation conversation, price formation, as CAISO has tackled it thus far, goes hand in hand, whether we like it or not, with mitigation. So that I think that is also, recognizing that that they most likely will continue to move forward together, and do recognize that we're in the same boat, I'd say, or let me speak for Seattle City Light specifically. We don't care where it goes, just as long as it gets addressed somewhere.
And maybe just from a process point, Kathleen, I think you brought this up as part of what your sector talked about is the scope. And that was one of the process things we talked about too. What happens when scope changes? So if it falls out of price formation, does it pop up in storage? How do we track that, you know, weaving in and out? And how do we have some of those conversations about whether it's being tabled and make sure that the right folks are part of that conversation? Because when things it's really hard for everybody to track everything. So when it moves from this bucket to that bucket, are the right people following it? Those types of things. Maybe it's a question back to the broader group and to KAISO staff about how we work that together.
I have a question on the idea behind the intertie bidding issue and the underlying nature of the market being voluntary. How do you view intertie bidding in the voluntary market construct where the decision for intertie bidding ultimately comes down to the BA?
Thanks for the question. Also on behalf of the IPP and marketer sector. So the way that this particular scope item was submitted from our perspective is posing the question, the policy question, again, of whether it or not that decision should always live with the PAA. As we evolve as a market, does that become something that we need? As we evolve with this market and other markets potentially that allow intertie trading at the seams, if we don't, does that mean we're taking value away from this system? These are very important policy questions from our perspective. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a scope item that clearly asked for the seams discussion.
That's helpful, and I actually wanted you to say that out loud rather than have us continue to guess on that, because it, you know, I do think it's an important issue. I'm happy that you're on the record with that answer. Maybe, yeah, moving questions into the room, as long as no additional questions from the liaisons. Questions or comments?
Thank you, Alicia Bonoy from Connect again. I was just wondering if you could speak to the next steps throughout this policy process as a company that's participating for the first time. It would be very helpful to know what we need to do moving forward to support our proposals.
So from a RIF perspective, we are one part of the ISO's broader policy initiatives catalog and roadmap process. What we intend to do as the RIF, as mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, is prepare a written document or a report that outlines kind of the consensus feedback on behalf of the different sectors based on the input that we've had from our members, the conversation we're having today, and then any follow-up questions or comments that stakeholders would want to submit to the liaisons. We're not having a formal comment period or anything like that, as the ISO does, for example. But if there's anything you wanted to send us as sort of follow-up feedback, we would certainly take a look at that. I don't know that we have a fixed time frame for when we're going to produce this document, but I would expect it would be fairly soon after the completion of this meeting, because we'd like for it to be available with enough time left for the ISO policy team who's working on the catalog and roadmap process to be able to consider it. And although our report is directed to the governing body, we intend to make that document public. And if people have questions or comments on what we ultimately put out, we're happy to have those conversations. In terms of engagement with the ISO process more broadly, the ISO has some information and timelines that they've put out on their stakeholder page for the catalog and roadmap process. And I believe the intent is to have some workshops or one workshop maybe. I see Amelia nodding in the April timeframe. And so that's a further opportunity to raise any items you may want to see covered.
And if I can just also add from a sector perspective, the way that the next steps will work is that from a sector perspective, at this point, the sector has done our work for this year. And so this is the culmination of that, and we're kind of passing it on. Now, that said, we do have this Word document. We have this document that has 40 scope items. The scope items I heard today will get added. I'm going to need you to send them to me, and we will do that. And that will become the living document as we move towards next year. And so I hope that is helpful and well received. But so it will get added to that document. And then we're trying to work off of a polling based process and really advocating among your peers in those meetings. So once you get added to the sector list, start coming to the sector meetings and raising why you're having challenges, how you think things can be better, and why. That's your platform. So I encourage you to get on the list, come to those meetings, encourage your friends who share similar interests to come to those meetings. The consensus bubbles up. So what we've presented and brought forward from a priority perspective is the consensus prioritization as of today. But by next year, Q1 of 2025, you may see something different based on your participation. So please engage and participate.
Doug Boccignone, I'm one of the consumer and utility sector liaisons. I just wanted to comment on, I didn't see as widespread support like we saw for storage and some of the others, price formation enhancements, but I think I heard at least a couple of sectors express support for trying to get more information to enable participants to weigh the cost and benefits of the different initiatives. And I know this is always a challenge, but because for some of these, it's hard to identify what the benefits might be. And also, we don't really know the resource commitment that's going to be involved for both the ISO and market participants. But I mean, there's a lot of great ideas here. There's no way all of them are going to get implemented right away, but maybe some of them will. And I don't know, I think we would all benefit if we could find some way to balance and weigh the costs and benefits. And then another area where I didn't hear it across all the sectors, but there were at least a couple who mentioned one that was important for the consumer and utilities, which is finding a way for the ISO to really make it clear when they're operating or when they're speaking or representing themselves as in their role as the balancing authority area operator versus the market operator. I think it would help make people more comfortable about how the decisions are being made and what's driving the decisions. And this is one that this has come up. I just say for the consumer-owned sector where we have participants inside the ISO and outside, it's like the people inside the ISO think the ISO is biased against, in favor of the outside, and the people outside think the opposite. And I don't think either is true, but there's just a perception there.
We do have a raised hand. Are you ready? Okay. Ryan Millard, you can go ahead.
There, Energy Resources. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you, Ryan.
Great, thanks. I realize the primary focus of this agenda topic is on the prioritization of the policy roadmap. But I think it would also be helpful to discuss in our sectors and maybe with the CAISO directly how we'd like to see some of these initiatives developed or rolled out. I don't want to suggest that fast tracking some initiatives or issues aren't warranted, but I do think an area of needed improvement for the CAISO's initiative process is the need to build out some firmer timelines associated with the policy development process. While working groups are critical, in many cases, the CAISO hasn't built firm timelines into the stakeholder discussions. I recognize this can sometimes be a balance between ensuring you have appropriate buy-in and consensus on problem identification and aren't rushing to a solution for a problem that hasn't been defined. But at a certain point, you have to push for a firm target where an initiative topic transitions from issue scoping to formal proposal development. And I don't know that that's always been consistently applied across all of the CAISO policy initiatives. And I just encourage everybody within the RIF, within your sectors, to start figuring out what is the scoping and target timelines for the development of these issues in order to realistically achieve some of these things.
Thanks, Ryan. That comment was really helpful, and to the extent that you'd like to provide more input or have thoughts on how that transition from the working group process to a formal stakeholder initiative works, I think we would be interested in your input and that of any of the other sector participants. I know that's a question that I've seen come up quite a bit in some of the working group processes lately as we look to kind of close out the issue scoping phase and move things forward. So I think that's a very timely comment. No one else on the phone? Why don't we move to slide, I think it is 34? Oh, 35, the next one. This might be a good time to hear from, we're extremely honored today to have Commissioner Houck from the California PUC here today on behalf of the body of state regulators. We'd also like to hear from Member Decker as in your capacity as the governing body liaison to the RIF, and then from the CAISO. I believe Anna McKenna is going to make some brief remarks. Thank you. However you're comfortable.
Thank you, and thank you for finding time on your agenda to hear from the body of state regulators. Again, I'm Darcy Houck, one of the 5 commissioners at the California Public Utilities and the California representative on the body of state regulators, or BOSSR. The body of state regulators did submit a written comment, and I'm going to just read that as it highlights the consensus from the body of state regulators, and a lot of time and effort went into this. So I want to thank all of the BOSSR members and Chris, who's also here, who staffed us on getting this done. The Western Energy Imbalance Market Body of State Regulators, or BOSSR, appreciates the opportunity to comment on the California Independent System Operators 2024 Policy Initiative Catalog and Roadmap Process. The BOSSR is a self-governing independent body composed of 1 state regulatory utility commissioner from each state in which a load-serving regulated utility participates in the Western Energy Imbalance Market, or WEIM, which includes the CalISO's real-time market. This includes the states of Arizona, California, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Oregon, Texas, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. The BOSSR also currently includes 2 liaisons representing consumer-owned utilities and 1 liaison representing federal power marketing administrators. One of the BOSSR's responsibilities is to express a common position when possible in ISO stakeholder processes or the WEIM governing body or WEIM issues. Overall, the BOSSR generally supports the ongoing policy initiatives and working groups. The BOSSR supports the opportunity for stakeholders to provide input on existing and new policy initiatives during this new roadmap process. This collaborative and inclusive approach, which takes into consideration the request of not only the CalISO and stakeholders internal to the balancing authority area, but also those who represent the broader WEIM footprint, will ensure the most critical issues facing the Cal ISO are addressed successfully. The BOSSER provides the following comments on the roadmap process. The BOSSER generally, again, supports the Cal ISO's ongoing policy initiatives and working groups and the timeline for their progress as outlined in the 2023-2025 policy roadmap. The BOSSER recognizes that the volume of initiatives that the Cal ISO can undertake is limited in scope by both the Cal ISO and stakeholder capacity, and thus laying out a realistic timeline for each initiative is a challenge. However, the BOSSER contends there are certain initiatives and market components that should be prioritized. Last April, the BOSSER commented on the previous roadmap iteration and recommended that the Cal ISO strive to complete phase 1 of the price formation enhancement initiative by the end of 2023. Despite phase 1 continuing into 2024, the BOSSER continues to recommend prioritization for this initiative. Likewise, the BOSSER continues to recommend the Cal ISO strive to complete phase 2 of the price formation enhancement initiative prior to the commencement of the extended day-ahead market or EDAM enhancements initiative in 2025. The price formation enhancements phase 1 initiative should also be prioritized as it will address components of the resource sufficiency evaluation enhancements or RSEE phase 3 initiative, the day ahead market enhancements DAME and the EDAM initiatives. We also note that the price formation enhancement initiatives have customer rate impacts that need to be fully understood as part of the initiative process. State regulators hope EDAM will provide both cost savings and improved reliability for ratepayers, and to ensure all states benefit from these anticipated outcomes, it's important that the initiative consider how to create a level playing field for all balancing authority areas, even where they may be situated differently. The BOSSER continues to recommend the Cal ISO begin the stakeholder workshops for the resource sufficiency evaluation enhancement phase 3 initiative as soon as possible. The financial consequences of failing the WEIM RSE approved jointly by the WEIM governing body and the Cal ISO Board of Governors in December of 2022 could potentially have significant impacts on balancing authorities that fail the test and opt in to continue receiving energy transfers. Therefore, the Cal ISO should monitor these financial consequences in connection with stakeholder workshops to ensure they create the incentive and results that the WEIM governing body and the Cal ISO governing board intended. Third, the BOSSER supports the ongoing greenhouse gas coordination and resource adequacy modeling and program design initiatives and working groups. Both initiatives are critical to the success of regional market expansion. In particular, the BOSSER supports a comprehensive approach to RA initiatives from market design to transmission development. The BOSSER encourages Cal ISO to coordinate any resource adequacy modeling and program design initiatives with both the California Public Utilities Commission's Resource Adequacy Program and the Western Power Pool's Western Resource Adequacy Program to ensure optimal interoperability. The greenhouse gas coordination is needed to ensure that multiple state greenhouse gas policies, including non-pricing policies, can be accommodated without adverse outcomes in EDAM. Throughout the stakeholder engagement process of EDAM, DAME, price formation enhancements, and transmission service and marketing schedule priority initiatives, the BOSSER has observed a lack of linkage between each initiative. These initiatives are interdependent despite the stakeholder processes being siloed from each other. BOSSER suggests that the Cal ISO consider aligning the timeline of these initiatives and detailing how the design elements of each initiative will work together in a cohesive manner. For example, the EDAM Enhancements Initiative should incorporate the outcome of the Price Formation Enhancement Initiative, including the Market Power Mitigation Mechanism and Pricing Mechanism, to ensure the transition is seamless and efficient. Since these initiatives have the potential to affect prices, we recommend that the Cal ISO continue to focus on reducing, to the extent possible, overall economic cost to consumers. These specific details should be clearly explained in the policy catalog and each of the proposals. Lastly, given the holistic nature and greater regional importance of the Price Formation Enhancement Initiative, the BOSSER continues to recommend this initiative be its own critical strategic and tactical objective, and that it be moved to the top of the ISO's priorities. As stated previously, the components within the initiative are overarching and impact the greater WEIM EDAM footprint. And we refer you to our prior comments on the 2023-25 roadmap from April of 2023 for further details on Bosser's recommendation for a revised critical, strategic, and tactical objective focused on efficient price formation under tight market conditions. As to process, last year, the Cal ISO received feedback on the catalog and policy initiative roadmap processes. Stakeholders expressed an interest in additional transparency with regards to prioritization, selection process, and organization of initiatives. The BOSSER is cognizant of Cal ISO's delicate balancing act of the need to prioritize initiatives internal to the BA and the overall request and priorities from the greater WEIM EDAM footprint. BOSSER appreciates Cal ISO's awareness of the importance of transparency in the initiative prioritization process and is pleased to learn that it is endeavoring to provide additional insight into its processes in this policy catalog iteration. Additionally, the BOSSER supports the Cal ISO's commitment to holding stakeholder workshops to identify opportunities for prioritization in this policy catalog iteration. BOSSER supports the incorporation of the Regional Issue Forum Roundtable as a convening for discussing among EIM sector representatives. BOSSER sees value in the regional and multi-sectoral a perspective that the RIF brings to the policy catalog development process as the Cal ISO seeks to manage resources and transparently balance priorities across the market footprint. The BOSSER also supports sequencing the initiative prioritization so that RIF sector participants are able to have the full set of stakeholder initiative proposals in advance, and that I think was mentioned earlier, of their sector discussions and prioritization prior to the Regional Issue Forum Roundtable. And so with that, I would just like to indicate again that BOSSER appreciates the changes underway at the Cal ISO to enhance the policy catalog and roadmap processes, supports the direction that Cal ISO is moving towards the overall improvement of the process, and again, appreciate the opportunity to provide this feedback here today in this forum. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hauk. We really appreciate the BOSSER's participation here today. We had seen the feedback that the BOSSER provided, and we welcome any input that the BOSSER would like to provide as we move forward with our roundtable process, both this year and in the future. Thank you.
Okay, Anita Decker, I'm the governing body liaison for the Regional Issues Forum. And I have to say, I being here today, it's like you have to acknowledge the wisdom of the GRC in making the change that allowed this forum and for people to embrace it, because the participation, the comments have been really, really enriching. I think particularly, I know Andy is going to appreciate it, and that the rest of the governing body could be here and listen to this I think it's going to be really rewarding for us as we put our input into this process as well. So the regional issues feedback today is going to be integral to the Cal ISO's policy initiatives and in respect to the priorities for improvement and strengthening a Western market. These things are important to the reliability, the economics, and to consumers who expect the lights to stay on. And they expect leaders in the industry to keep those lights on, and they expect us to look at the economies of scale that keeps costs for them at a reasonable and defensive level. And I think the things that came up today in terms of there's a lot of commonality. So there's a lot of commonality. They prioritize things that will do all those things, preserve the reliability, defensible costs in doing so, and move us forward. So this was a robust presentation, and I want to applaud each of the sector leads that you got the participation and engagement of your sectors to actually bring this forward. Because I don't think any of this was one sector, one person speaking on their own behalf. It really looked like it was a consolidation of a lot of input and a lot of work on your part, because you all have day jobs. You're volunteering to do this work, and yet you're here and you've got good participation in the audience. I'm assuming there was good participation on the phone, and you've got some real content to go back to your sectors and say, look what we've done, look what we accomplished. And I'm looking forward to the report that you guys will provide. So, and we do want it to be transparent. As I think and listen about the priorities and how does that get set? I mean, there's things around, what is the cost? How many entities benefit? There's a lot of parameters that can be put into that hopper of how do you decide which goes first? I do think that price formation, that's one of our key things with our independent market expert. So price formation is something that we're absolutely watching. We're absolutely watching greenhouse gas. Your comments along those lines are really critical to us also supporting what you're doing and then seeing that you're going to support what we think that the priorities are as well. So I really do appreciate the participation. I also have to acknowledge the Cal ISO staff. They have embraced this change. And, you always wonder, are they going to really support it? And what I'm seeing is support on both sides of this fence. And that's kind of a recipe for success. So thank you to the ISO staff for all the work that they've done to help get this presentation to today. I would say, I think the footer needs to be Regional Issues Forum instead of WEIM on your slides. You guys need to be acknowledged. So I appreciate the commonalities. This provided a lot of clarity as I think about the roadmap and as it comes to us for acceptance or adoption. And I really appreciate that so many stakeholders were engaged here. And I think it's a real model, not just for the roadmap, for initiatives as well. I realize everyone will still make their own stakeholder. They'll still make your own stakeholder comments as a stakeholder in the initiatives, but you still can also come together sometimes as groups. And just the power of a group is really powerful. And I think you guys sense that here today. So I just want to applaud you for the work that you guys have done.
Thank you so much. We always appreciate and welcome your insight as our liaison to the governing body. And so thank you for being here today. And thank you to so many members of the governing body for attending and members of the board as well. Anna?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anna McKenna, Vice President of Market Design Analysis here at the ISO. I'm just going to make a few remarks, but I will say I would like to echo governing body members Decker's comments, which I cannot agree with more, as well as Stacy's comments earlier, that you took your assignment from the GRC to heart, and I'm very impressed with the amount of coordination and coalescing and bringing forth really good material to this process. And I cannot thank you enough for that, because it's a really difficult task at times to, thread that common theme across the comments that we receive. And you all have done a tremendous job. All the sector liaisons have done a tremendous job. So thank you, RIF leadership, for taking on the task, sector liaisons, and stakeholder community at large for really bringing to us a good array of comments and information to this process. I will say, however, I disagree a little bit with Kathleen. Our work is not done. We obviously have more work to do. She thought her work was done, but you did such a good job. Now we're going to rely on you more. But it's really important that as we follow through the next steps, obviously staff is, this is a new process for ISO staff in the sense that we are really trying to enhance the process, to take in the information and reflect the thoughts and the input that you all provide us and what we feed back to you throughout the process. So it's really an iterative process. I do encourage you all to participate in the April 22nd meeting, which will be a prioritization discussion. There may be more than one, I'm told, but I think that's the next item. And then we hope to have a draft in June. So those are important dates to consider that we then have an opportunity to discuss again, and there'll be some iteration around that. I did want to note that I really did hear a lot, and there's a lot of themes that came up today, so I'm not going to go through every one of them. And if I don't mention it, it's not because I didn't hear it. But I did want to say that I took to heart really the comments on the process. And that's really important, because I think there are so many issues out there. It's difficult sometimes to really put forth a rational explanation as to why certain things rise to the top, certain things do not. And what is the process for getting all those things processed through and have your voice heard. I think part of this right now is that we are evolving the stakeholder process on the roadmap process. We are also, as you all know, evolving our stakeholder process. And so I heard very loud and clear the need for additional information on how all these processes are evolving and what's next, what's to expect coming out of these processes. I also did think was really helpful to hear, that there is a need to move from principles, policy, problem statements, and to actual policy design phases. I'd like to share with you all that, again, your work is not done. When we get to that phase, we're going to be collaborating with you all again and looking for your input in the market design or policy design phases. So that's something that is part of this process that I think, you will probably have the opportunity to leverage, hopefully, the sector work that was done through that feedback as well. So that's future work to come and many of the areas that you've all already mentioned, but it's really part of the evolution of having you all be part of that process more intimately. Lastly, I just wanted to note that thanks for doing a good chunk of our work. I think our staff is a little bit more relieved with the coalescing and summarizing that you all did. Just kidding. I think we have more work to do, but I really do appreciate the documentation part of this. And I say that not, a little bit jokingly, but documentation is really critical because what happens a lot is things get lost. And so the part of I think the success of the ISO stakeholder process has been largely based on the ability to have documented and iterative approach. And you've taken that, approach to this as well, which I greatly appreciate because I think it will help us all keep track of your input more cohesively. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna. I'd like to reiterate our thanks to the ISO team for incorporating this roundtable process as a meaningful step in the ISO's catalog and roadmap update. Any final public comments from the liaisons before we wrap up?
Yeah, just I think there was a comment earlier, what if this is your first time going through the roadmap process? And to highlight, I think, it just came up that this is all of our first time going through the RIF roundtable. And as I know we've talked with our sector about this, but as folks have thoughts or feedback on how it went, what type of insight, especially from CAISO staff and the EIM governing body, what types of information was most helpful to come out through those discussions that you maybe don't get in the written materials. I think that's something that would be really helpful for us in planning for round 2 of this at some point.
Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, if we can go to slide 36, I think this is the last one in the roundtable deck. If you do want to provide any follow-up, all of our contact information is available on the EIM website under the RIF page. There's a link there. If you're not sure who to communicate with, you can contact me, you can contact Allie, you can contact Josh, and we'll help you. And look for our report out following this meeting in the coming weeks. And thanks to everyone very much for your participation.
Have a oh, they put their hand down. Never mind. Oh, they put it back up. Is there
All right.
Kamaya Abru, is she able to speak?
Sorry?
Are we able to have somebody speak?
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Apologies for speaking out of turn. I wanted to make this comment earlier, but had some technical issues. Kathleen, I just wanted to thank you for inviting the DR sector to join the IPP sector, or clarifying that that is the correct place for our participation. Voltus is a demand response provider like LEAP and Connect. And I just wanted to take the opportunity publicly to support the comments made earlier by Alicia Vanoy and Colin Smith regarding the 2 proposals put out for device level metering and the modified PDR participation model. With respect to the second, Voltus agrees with, I think, what Colin was saying about the amount of capacity that is growing in California and available, but that needs to be enabled to participate in the market. And we're really excited by this MPDR proposal. So we are hopeful that through the rest of this process, there will be an opportunity to prioritize that proposal in particular and continue to bring demand response resources into the capacity markets. So thank you, apologize again for speaking right at the end here, but appreciate this roundtable forum.
Thanks very much for your input. Sienna, is there anyone else on the phone before we wrap up? All right, I think we're going to take a break until 3:30 when we'll reconvene for our panel on energy storage. Thanks, everyone.
We have more. Thank you. So go to the next slide. If we go to the next slide, then now in that same year, in 2021, we have 1,500 megawatt. And now you start seeing the shape that you used to see. Because at this point in time now, it's no longer just providing ancillary service, but the ancillary service is somewhat crowded, and then you get the energy portions, and it starts shaping that energy day-ahead schedule, which is the green color there, start seeing the same similar pattern that you used to be seeing. Now people start recognizing and realizing how we are using. Now, contrast this, not to contrast it, to add to this, if we go to the next slide, if I put that shape against the actual solar productions, you could see it where that blue, which is the battery energy storage dispatch, is following pretty darn well with the energy and the regulations of the solar that we have. So anytime you have a solar that needs, solar fluctuations that created ACE, the regulation filled it up, and the battery does very well functions of that. All right, so that's basically where we are right now, where the batteries reflect both. The utilization of battery reflect both the regulations, which is AS and the service, and the energy need. It's pretty cool. So the next slide, you probably have seen this in the next slide. This is when we start talking about state of charge. And what I'm showing you is the observation of state of charge for battery energy service in California ISOs. It's in the next slide here, slide 9. You will see that it's just like any other thing. You know, your state of charge is going up as we charge it during the day. Still waiting for the slide. There you go. So this is the charge megawatt hour, the state of charge, as you go from during the day, and then you have more and more state of charge up until about 5 p.m. and then you start seeing it, and you start discharging when your state of charge is going lower. That's just for 2 months in June and July, but I think I want to say this is about same 2021 and 2022 time frame here. So it's a very common observation. So I think many of you know about this already. So which bring me to my last slide, which is the kind of like an overall observations where we've been at. The last slide that I have, if we can go. For me, I think in the system operations, we think about the battery is a very, very good tool. One thing that we noted that it's very important for the market optimizations that we have to account for and model that battery, specifically the state of charge. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So, you know, for us, that's very important. Our operators look at it, review it, make sure that when we go to the net peak, we always have our battery somewhat fully charged. So we know that, okay, we can use it going into that net peak hours. One thing that often people didn't realize that the frequency response setting in the this battery with the inverter, they could do a lot of stuff, and it's actually have helped California ISO's frequency response. Our frequency response as a BA has increased quite significantly this past 3 years. So it's been very, very good. So that's one thing that's often we don't talk about a lot in the public setting, but it's really been really well. And the continued coordination and collaborations between California ISO, scheduling coordinators, and the plant operators are, I think it's a key success to what we've been doing here and continue need to be coordinated as we are going through different stages in getting this to work. So both in the building, the pre-commercialization, post-commercial operations, very, very important for us because I've seen this as part of my portfolio of responsibility, anywhere from new resource implementation, so where we implement this, we put it in the synchronizations, put it in the testing, put it in the commercials, and then COD. To make this successful, we have to coordinate and collaborate really quickly. So yeah, in summary, I think been very, very happy and thankful, and want to appreciate everybody's that makes us to have the most battery in the world probably right now. 7,000. I think it's probably getting to 8,000 before we know it here. Very, very, very fast, considering that back 4 years ago, we only have 100 megawatt. Now we have 7,000 over, close to 8,000. Thanks.
Thanks, Dee Dee. It is really amazing to see the growth. It's just incredible. I think what we're going to do is, if you have questions for Dee Dee, jot them down, hold them, because I want to get through all the panelists, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask them lots of good questions. So now Pam is going to give her experience from Portland General's perspective of operating storage in an EIM entity outside of the ISO.
Can we bring up my slides? Or maybe I'll just start chatting as we bring up the slides. So I'm Pam Sporborg. I'm the Director of Transmission and Market Services at Portland General Electric, and we're going to talk today about some of the challenges of integrating a battery into the energy imbalance market without the kind of full integration that the CAISO's integrated marketplace provides. I'll start by giving you a little bit of an overview of PGE and our service territory and why batteries are critically important to our future as a balancing authority and for our decarbonization targets and for capacity resources. We'll talk about some of our long-term goals with the battery and our operational parameters of the batteries as part of our virtual power plant fleet. And then I'll also share the batteries that we have online today and are bringing online in the near future before getting into some of our operational and integration successes and challenges with the energy imbalance market. So on the next slide, Portland General is a mid-sized utility. We have about 1.9 million residents in our service territory. We have a 4,447 megawatt peak load that was set during the 2021 heat dome. Once we, actually the previous system peak had been set in 1996. So that peak stood for a lot of years and was under 4,000 megawatts. And since 2021, that 4,000 megawatt target just seems like just an average hot operating day. So we are seeing a significant amount of load growth, both with kind of endogenous load growth in our service territory, as well as a lot of growth in the technology sector with data centers. On the next slide. So this slide I wanted to share. So PGE is a compact service territory, primarily an urban service territory. Most of our generating resources are remote to our service territory. And then on the next slide, you can see that they are pretty constrained by the transmission system on the Northwest. If we could go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So these are where our resources, our current generating resources are in position to the BPA flow gates. The slide is a little bit outdated as there's another flow gate at the very bottom that basically puts every single generator in the entire Western interconnection on the other side of a flow gate, a BPA flow gate, and its ability to deliver to PGE. So we are a very transmission constrained utility, and we have been partnering with BPA on a number of upgrade projects to help expand the deliverability to our service territory. And those projects are going into effect anytime, I mean, currently all the way through 2030. But in the meantime, we are investing a lot in energy storage to help bring some of that energy on the other side of the flow gate in order to really be able to meet some of the reliability challenges we've seen with a lot of dynamic operating conditions in the West. So on the next slide, the energy storage is part of a broader portfolio for PGE. We call this the virtual power plant. This includes everything from our demand response programs, distributed solar, distributed thermal resources like backup generation, distributed solar at customer-sited properties, as well as utility scale solar. There's a lot of these assets that we're investing in and bringing online. These are both PGE and customer investments. And by 2030, we expect to receive up to 25% of our peak capacity out of distribution-sited resources. So the virtual power plant is the way that we're thinking about aggregating and operationalizing these assets so that they can be fully visible and dispatchable to the extent that they are able to be dispatched into the market. So that's almost 2,000 megawatts of VPP-enabled capacity by 2030, with battery storage both on the distributed side as well as at the utility scale, a really big part of that pathway. On the next slide. So this is a list of our current storage assets, or the ones that are going to be energized in the next 2 years. I will point out that our first energy storage asset was energized in 2013 as part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act Smart Grid Demonstration Project that was a Northwest-wide demonstration project. We invested in the Salem Smart Power Center, which was a 5 megawatt, 2.5 megawatt hour battery. And that battery was really used as a demonstration case where we were able to test a number of different operating parameters with the battery and get a lot of lessons learned. We're able to do everything from dispatch it economically for it to be a price responsive asset, to providing frequency response and other, basically every type of battery use case you can imagine. And we were able to take those lessons learned and incorporate them into a number of other early investments in energy storage. I think that was the 5th utility scale battery installed in the United States. So moving on from there, we are currently looking at bringing on over 400 megawatts of energy storage in the next 12 months. And that will be a pretty substantial increase in our storage portfolio and our storage assets. On the next slide. The first asset that we will integrate into the Western Energy Imbalance Market is called Coffee Creek. This is actually a distribution connected asset, but is a 17 megawatt, 34 megawatt hour battery. And we are using this as a test case so that we can really get a blueprint for how to integrate a storage asset into the Western Energy Imbalance Market and then take those lessons learned for the additional 400 megawatts that we are bringing online. We expect in the long run that we want all of our storage assets to be participating resources, but we have a number of barriers that we're working through in order to be able to fully achieve that. So on the next slide, we have those barriers. So these are, I think, just a really high-level list of the challenges that the integration team is facing right now. And the bottom line is that until we can really identify and work through these different challenges, we will be self-scheduling our storage resources because we don't have really good solutions to some of the harder questions. I think particularly the most challenging issue with integrating into the Western EIM is that it's a 4.5 hour look ahead, and that we really have some limited cycle capability, either contractually or economically on these resources. And we don't want to see the market overcycle them when it's not really taking a 24-hour optimization window into consideration. And we don't have really good ways of addressing the limited look ahead at this time to really get the batteries to be charging and discharging optimally through the market And so at this point, our intent is to self-schedule those resources until we get a little bit better sense of how we can come up with the appropriate bid strategies or tools to better position those resources on a 24-hour basis. I think the other really main challenge I want to highlight is that a lot of the ISO's business practices are geared at, and storage modeling tools or portfolios are really geared at the ISO's integrated marketplace. And there's a challenge in translating those practices and procedures into the Western Energy Imbalance Market. There's not a handbook that says, if it says this for the ISO marketplace, it means this for the Western Energy Imbalance Market. And so there's a lot of tribal knowledge that we really have to extract in order to work through that new resource integration process. I think that's kind of a global kind of piece of feedback that I think has really challenged some of our integration team to really be able to find, go to the business practice and be able to easily translate an ISO requirement into a Western EIM requirement. And so with that, I think that's my presentation, and look forward to questions at the end.
Thanks so much, Pam. So Don's now going to give the perspective of parties who are operating storage resources within the CAISO.
So good afternoon, everybody. Don Trethewey on behalf of the California Energy Storage Enhancements. If we can jump to the next slide, please. So just wanted to highlight, we're a broad industry consortium. We have lots of companies developing both shorter term and longer term storage resources. So this is our board members. If you move to the next slide, this is our general membership. So, a large group of individuals coming together to figure out how best to utilize storage as we make this energy transition. Next slide, please. So we did think it would be fun to share CESA's actual internal strategic objectives with regards to the California Independent System Operator. And I think you'll see a fair amount of alignment with what was discussed on the previous panel discussion. So we definitely are interested in improving the storage optimization and dispatch, both the day ahead and real time, as well as energy and ancillary services. We want to improve the way that hybrid resources are modeled. And we want to ensure fair, transparent, and efficient price formation. I think the key thing to take away from the first three is the energy market is the fuel source of the storage resource. So storage resource is uniquely interested in having very accurate marginal prices because that's how you can optimally manage the actual storage resources. We also want to potentially look at some additional hedging tools with regards to around congestion that was mentioned earlier. And then we also have some interest in reevaluating storage as a transmission asset, especially around some of the long duration storage and the ability for those type of resources to defer transmission investment. And then lastly, our membership has been very heavily involved in the CAISO's interconnection process enhancements. We've put on 8,000 megawatts in 4 years, but the target is even greater in terms of more and more new builds. And so we need to find a way to get this process to move quicker. So we move to the next slide. I'm going to jump into a couple issues. So the first one is around sort of the resource modeling, and accurate costs actually gives you the optimal scheduling. And I would note that the non-generator resource models, been around for many years, but there really hasn't been any significant changes to how it's actually modeled. And there's sort of two areas that have been discovered as the size of the fleet has expanded. The first is, if you fully discharge the battery or fully charge the battery, there's implications to both the cost and the ability to follow a dispatch instruction. So to the extent that you're going to a real deep state of charge, there's actually higher maintenance costs, there's more cell degradation. And so the ability to actually reflect that in the market would allow the resource to be more optimally managed. The other item that changes is that the rate at which you can charge and discharge also changes as you get to the in, the edge conditions of the state of charge. And so it's really important to actually model that accurately, because if you assume that it can discharge at its full capability in those edge conditions, you're actually going to be sending infeasible dispatches to the storage resource. And you would rather know that what you're going to get out of the storage resource is limited in these instances. But what's important is, if you model these correctly, you can take advantage of the full range of the state of charge. I would note that the previous energy storage enhancements did a preliminary look at trying to address these issues, but it was actually de-scoped. So it is currently, I believe, in scope for the energy storage enhancements that is currently on the roadmap. So we're looking forward to getting that started and coming up with a way to either enhance the non-generator resource model or potentially other models that we would want to better reflect both the cost and the operational characteristics. So we move to the next slide. I'm actually going to talk about the 831 issue and try to explain what we've been observing. And I'll start with so this is September 6th of 2022, and let's start with the two graphs on the right. So on the top chart, that's actually the prices. So the red line is the prices in day ahead, and the blue line is the prices in real time. And it's hard to see the 1,000, but there's a couple hours in the day ahead that went above $1,000. But then there's a pretty wide block that went above $1,000. So you're in high-priced conditions, and that changes what the actual bid stack looks like. So when you're in high-priced conditions, you can have economy exports are now able to bid up to $2,000. You can have a non-resource adequacy import. Those can bid $2,000, and that they can bid up to $2,000 even if they wanted to, for instance, buy back their day ahead schedule. Then you have a limit on what a resource adequacy system import can bid. There's a calculation that the CAISO does where they come up with an hourly maximum price. They shape it based on indexes, shape indexed prices, so they can get an accurate hourly value. And then for internal resources, as well as external resources where it's the import's resource specific, there's a process by which a resource could request what they call a reference level adjustment. So they can prove to the CAISO that their costs have gone above 1,000 and they can now bid to that level. Or the CAISO also automatically calculates reference level adjustments. For instance, if they see a spike in gas prices between day ahead and real time. But the limitation on storage is that since they're using the non-generator resource model, they're only allowed to bid to $1,000, even during high price conditions. And so what this has the effect of doing is, let's say that you approved a gas resource reference level adjustment and said the gas resource can bid $1,300. Well, the market optimization is going to see a gas resource at $1,300 and a storage resource at $1,000. And it would say, oh, you know what? I'm not going to bother dispatching that storage resource. How about I discharge the battery, or don't charge it, don't use its day ahead charge schedule. That's the cheapest solution, but it doesn't recognize that once you've done that, you potentially have exposed the storage resource as well as the reliability of the system to the fact that you've actually used that storage resource earlier than you wanted to. And in the real-time market, since the horizon, so in day ahead, this is less of an issue because in day ahead, the market looks over a 24-hour period. It optimizes over the entire horizon. Every hour is financially binding. So it's able to position the resource optimally day ahead. But in real time, since that horizon does not go out to the balance of the day, the only way that the market optimization can be made aware that there's a cost or the need to not dispatch this resource is through the actual energy offers. So ideally, you would want to see, when you're in high-priced conditions, that the non-generator resource isn't capped at $1,000. It's capped at some amount higher so that it can be at the top end of the bid stack and avoid that scenario that I talked about earlier, where you basically say, oh, I don't need to run the gas resource because I can either discharge or not charge my storage resource. So we will be providing comments in the price formation enhancements on something that could hopefully be implemented by summer, where maybe, for instance, you can't go all the way to $2,000, but there is a way to potentially make it consistent with, for instance, a resource adequacy system import, so that at least you get it at the upper end of the bids. So if we move to the next slide, we'll actually look at a specific resource. And what I've done is I've taken the hours in which the price was above $1,000. So storage was limited to 1,000, but other resources could bid above what storage resources can do. And what we're also showing here is that the black line, this is actually the real-time net load. So this is not day-ahead net load. This isn't it's not what the day-ahead market cleared at. But if you look at the blue bars, that's actually the day-ahead schedule of this given resource. So the day-ahead schedules actually set this resource up for success where it was discharging at its highest levels during the peak real-time conditions. But since we're in this window now where some resources can bid above 1,000, which is greater than what storage can bid, we see, lo and behold, there's dispatches in hour ending 1617, which basically has reduced the amount that's actually available to be supported, to support those day-ahead schedules. So in this instance, the resources day-ahead schedule was actually dispatched down about 52% during those 4 highest priced hours. And if we remember the prices on the previous slide, all of those real-time prices significantly exceeded the day-ahead price. So for every hour, every delta between the blue bar and the green bar in those 4 hours from hour ending 18 to hour ending 21, that's a loss for the storage resource. They're having to buy back at a higher day-ahead price than what they were paid in the earlier hours when they were dispatched. So that's sort of the near-term issue that we think we need to find a way to resolve for this, because with 8 gigawatts of storage on the system now, do you really want to see 4 gigawatts move around inefficiently? That could be very, very problematic. So if we jump to my last slide. Oh, there are other items that Kathleen pointed this out, so I'm not going to go through this list, but there's other enhancements that we're looking at, but recognizing that you need to have priorities, and I think I've highlighted our 2 main ones, which is, if we move now to my last slide. So in terms of our recommendations, we need to find some way to address the bid stack issue. I have here bidding up to $2,000. As I've thought about it more, I think there's ways that as long as you just get up to, for instance, what the RA imports are, that's probably enough to address this problem to where it won't be dispatched too early. We do need to, again, improve the operational characteristics, cost modeling, potential mitigation methodologies, but that all can be addressed in the currently on the roadmap energy enhancements initiative, and we just want to see that started as soon as we can. And then lastly, really accelerating the price formation working group transition from a working group to actual designs. We've talked a lot about scarcity pricing, and we can probably start talking about a design. And unfortunately, even the items in phase 2 and phase 3, we haven't even really discussed what those mean. So I think moving that ahead would be beneficial. So with that concludes my remarks, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Great. Thanks so much, Don. So now Alva is going to give a perspective about experience operating long duration storage and ideas about different ways, different storage models.
I'm on now. Good. I'm going to define long duration storage here in what I think is consistent with the California's integrated resource plan, which is there's a need that's been defined for 4-hour storage and a need that's been defined for 8-hour storage. And then anything above 8 hours is essentially called long duration storage. Currently in the integrated resource plan, it's a relatively small amount in terms of gigawatts. Obviously, if the duration is long enough, it could be a lot of gigawatt hours. But it's in the near term, this is more like looking to the future beyond some of the scope of what's been talked about here so far. So I'm free to speculate a little bit more. I'm also free to sort of look to the past to some extent. If we go to the next slide, I'd like to make the case from my experience at PG&E that the California ISO has implemented successfully long duration storage models in the markets as they are. And my main argument here is going to be that these models, with some modifications, may be directions to look at for enhancements that would make long duration storage modeling feasible without having to essentially reinvent from the ground up the model of long duration storage. So the first model is hydro, dispatchable hydro. PG&E has a lot of this, and we have probably similar configurations to some EIM participants in the sense that our hydro is in a cascade configuration, so it can't necessarily be actually dispatched as a set of individual resources. The dispatch has to be consistent all along a cascade of powerhouses. But we sort of internalized that aspect of it. So we're going to be looking in general at a plan for operating hydro over a given day, and then creating bids per the CAISO's model of hydro for the given day. And the way bids look is you can put a price in if you want, but in general, the big driver for hydro is the daily energy limit in the day-ahead market. And so essentially you're offering a bucket of energy potentially at zero or very low price to CAISO, and then CAISO essentially is going to be using that to peak shave prices, if you will. The other element of the hydro model, as we have experienced it, is the question, and this goes to the question of how you get a default energy bid for a hydro resource, is that we do our hydro planning on an annual basis. We distill the annual plan down to monthly values, which we provide to CAISO, and CAISO uses the monthly values to calculate a default energy bid based on what it thinks essentially what the prices are going to look like in a given month, and using the hydro in the highest value hours, and then finding essentially the marginal hour to use to calculate the default energy bid. Now, this is all oriented around the IFM, the integrated forward market, the day-ahead market, and so I really feel Pam's pain in how she described the situation of EIM participants, because the energy limit can be respected day ahead, and it can be valued correctly in the optimization based on that default energy bid. When you get into real time, I'm not sure that the horizon should really be described as 4.5 hours. I think of it in terms of the binding solution of the market, which is an hour or an hour and 5 minutes. And so it's even worse in a sense than what you described, in the sense that the market is not going to see value beyond the coming hour. And so even for a hydro resource, if you're trying to respect an energy constraint, there's only one way to do it, obviously, and that's through a price. The energy limit in itself is only going to be effective in the real-time market if it's actually binding within that hour, which is not normally going to be the case. And so I do feel that this issue of the default energy bid is an important one for hydro as well as for batteries, for that reason, that you're looking at it for EIM participants in particular, you're looking at a horizon of 1 hour and trying to inform the market, the CAISO, of what your future value within the day is going to be for that resource. But that said, let's assume that everybody here is going to join the EDAM rather than just the EIM. In that context, I think the hydro model is a very successful one. A slight variation on the hydro model that evolved because PG&E and SCE have large pump storage resources is the pump storage model, which is really a water battery model. And it essentially is just a bid to pump and a bid to discharge. It includes commitment costs and commitment states. So you actually can only pump at one level. I think Dee Dee actually provided a really nice graph of what a pump storage schedule might look like. It actually has on the discharge side, it has a minimum, and then it can discharge a particular one powerhouse might discharge, say, up to 400 megawatts. So you're able to bid the discharge and the pumping in such a way that the CAISO can optimize those bids over the course of a day. That again is a long duration storage model. I think I should have said in the case of hydro, but also in the case of pump storage, the CAISO is not monitoring state of charge. So the state of charge management has to be internalized by the long duration storage holder in both of those models. A model that is now becoming very popular in California, which I also think could be appropriate for long duration storage, is the hybrid battery model, which is essentially looking at a battery bid in conjunction with currently another resource. But in essence, the hybrid model is an NGR model, which is just a bid curve. So you're just saying, I'm willing to buy at a certain price, I'm willing to sell at a certain price. There's a dispatch curve between that minimum and maximum, and that bid gets processed by CAISO as is. You are entirely responsible for the SOC management. More than that, you actually have to provide information to CAISO about what your SOC really was and what your VERS were really doing so that they can check and make sure you're not gaming the system after the fact. But what's notable in all of that is CAISO does not manage state of charge in the market. So again, for a long, in theory, you could have a hybrid that was saying, I will discharge for the entire day. Your bids could be taken. That would be your result. And if you can execute on that, that's a perfectly acceptable solution for a hybrid model. Each of these has some limitations in representing long duration storage. And I'll go to those in my final slide. But before I get to that, I just wanted to go to the next slide and point out what long duration storage is for, or what are the use cases that make it different from other forms of storage. Notably, number one and two are uses of storage in horizons that far exceed the day-ahead market. So notably, we would probably see ultimately a much larger need than the 1 or 2 gigawatts in California if we have an entirely decarbonized grid, because you have to then be able to move energy from the winter to the summer, and that requires a ability of a market participant to be able to correctly value storing energy in the winter and actually paying for that energy in the winter and then discharging it in the summer. We, as possessors of hydro resources, are lucky enough to be able to get essentially free charging for much of the year. And so that's a calculation that isn't as hard for us to make as it will be for the long duration storage holder. A second use, which I think in some ways is even more important and is really difficult to handle in the market currently, and I think it requires a resource adequacy-like product, is being able to earmark some storage to provide backup power when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. That is not something that's predictable. It's not something that's going to show up in forward prices. And so it's something that essentially has to be paid for on the side, in my opinion. And I'll look to people like Don to offer perhaps alternatives. But my instinct is that something like resource adequacy with an energy component might be one way to ensure that there's enough long duration storage energy around to provide backup for those kinds of conditions, which will become quite critical in another 10 years, I think. And then of course, long duration storage may also have use cases that are entirely outside of the electric markets. And there I would particularly note the potential for hydrogen to not be simply a cycle of creating hydrogen to operate a power plant. Hydrogen is essentially going to be a commodity that's created and will be sold where it's most valuable. If it's most valuable to fuel a power plant, that's where it'll go, but it isn't necessarily going to be where it goes. I think EV charging is another example because drivers have always the optionality of not connecting their car to the charger. So, you know, there's, I wish our DR aggregators very well, but I think they have to always be concerned about the fact that by simply not plugging your car into the charger, you can maintain your you know, the charge on your battery as for your own purposes. And it's not really the same thing as refusing to, you know, obey a market instruction. So going to the last slide, my thoughts on how the models might be enhanced or what a new model might look like for long duration storage. And this is sort of going to, as Matt had pointed out, we put a request in for potentially a future initiative on this subject. I think it's possible this might be handled more easily than it has been scoped out to be because of the fact that the existing models can potentially be refined and used both in the day-ahead market and in real time if there's proper pricing. So just to go into what those might be. Well, first of all, the pump storage model, if it simply had a dispatchable pumping curve, in other words, there's a minimum pumping level and a maximum pumping level, could be used essentially to describe any arbitrary long duration storage resource. So I think that change has a lot of potential without obviously knowing what's in the guts of the Siemens code. I think, you know, you still have essentially integer variables that say you're in the pumping state or you're in the generation state, but when you're pumping, there's no reason that pumping couldn't be represented as a bid curve, essentially, for how much you want to pump. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is to enhance the hydro model. And essentially, what you would do there is just simply allow a hydro resource or a so-called hydro resource to bid to charge. As long as it has the ability to offer to buy energy as well as discharge energy, you simply then use the existing characteristics that I had mentioned, the throughput limit for the day and the monthly energy plan, to control its dispatch in the day and to control its bidding behavior through a default energy bid. So that's another fairly simple modification that I think could potentially handle long duration storage. And I will welcome people telling me that I'm completely off my rocker, but this is what it looks like to me from my vantage. Finally, I think there's also possibilities of enhancing the NGR model. Essentially, taking the hybrid model and making it available for any battery would be one direction to go. Another would be to look at the state of charge enforcing models and just simply acknowledge that that the CAISO does want to manage state of charge for whatever reason, or maybe just because the market participant wants it managed, and provide an ability to submit an initial state of charge and a final state of charge as a bid in the market for a given day. That's a hard thing to translate into strictly real-time concepts, but in the day ahead, that concept would work, because essentially what you'd say is, I want to be at 100 at the beginning of the day and 200 at the end of the day. Therefore, I'm putting in a bid for charging over the course of the day, which is intended to leave me at 200 at the end of the day. And then my people on my team at work have always been fans of the idea of spread bidding. I don't think it's necessarily very relevant to whether it's long duration or short duration storage, but I do want to propose one way of possibly implementing the idea of a spread bid, which is that essentially batteries of any duration could essentially say, CAISO, look at my bid as a spread bid rather than as a charging bid and a discharge bid. Suppose that I'm bidding at $500 to charge and $510 to discharge. View that as a spread bid of 10. What CAISO then does with that bid is, since you flagged it as a spread bid, it moves the charge bid down to the level at which charging is happening, say in the market power mitigation run or in a preliminary run or in a forecast. So that essentially they're going to take that bid as willingness to charge at the market price as long as I get my $10 spread on discharge. So essentially, they could take your bid, reformat it so that it's processed in the market like any other, like a reasonable set of bids. And that, I believe, would allow spread bids to be properly dispatched in the CAISO market. If you're not aware of it right now, if you bid 500 and 510, the resource will not get dispatched because it's completely out of the money. It doesn't matter that you're only asking for a $10 spread. There have been other proposals, and I won't go into them here because I'm not a huge fan of them, but there are MSG-style proposals for dealing with long-duration storage as well, where storage would create essentially configurations for the resource. That code is not understood. The algorithm isn't written out, so that's why I basically don't trust it, as I haven't seen the math for that in a way that made sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alva. Thanks to all the panelists. Great presentations. I want to kick this off with the discussion of what do you think, as either a resource operator or the system operator, is like the most important thing that could be fixed before this summer that would have a big impact on improving the market efficiency?
Well, I think the bid cap is the thing that I think it probably can be fixed. We haven't proven that yet, but I think it probably can be fixed.
Yeah, I think we heard the CAISO on the call that they wanted, it has to be the minimum narrow focus. I think, in our comments, we're going to be very narrowly focused on just the real-time market. We also heard at the end of the statement that CAISO was concerned that, bidding $2,000 all the time, you could have prices at $2,000. I think, the real objective that we have is getting to the right spot in the bid curve so that you're not dispatched. And I would note that a lot of people in the Pacific Northwest had the same issues that we've observed with storage resources during the January cold snap, because they had set their base schedules for the day to basically have their hydro set up for success. That doesn't mean they're not willing to change things, but they're only willing to change things in an extreme or condition. And so by getting them to the top end of the bid stack, that basically means I'll exhaust all my other opportunities, but if I still need it, I will forego my day ahead plan that I had set up so perfectly. But I'm at least making that decision at the right point. I've exhausted everything else I need to do. And I think it's more important to get that energy bid in the stack correctly so that the market optimization can make that decision. And we don't have to rely on manual dispatches or restricting offering into the market, like for instance, self-scheduling those resources, because there are instances where you do want to use it, and you want to mess up the day ahead schedules, and you need to give that opportunity the optimization. And the way that you give that opportunity is to allow that intraday opportunity cost to be reflected in the energy bid of these resources.
I think we all agree. As Don pointed out, I think we saw some of the same issues with water management over the January events in the Pacific Northwest, and that the ability to leverage bid price, which has been the common tool for managing water flow or state of charge, runs into a $1,000 cap when your market is above $1,000 cap. So it becomes particularly challenging, I think, when you need the resource to meet your resource efficiency tests, but you can't just take it out of the market. But the way the market prices run don't allow you any room to actually manage the state of flow or the state of charge on that asset.
Edie?
Well, I think a lot of this discussions has been revolving around the economic and the business structures. If you ask me what I really want, I want more battery to be in the system before summer to begin with, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge that we have right now, is trying to just integrate another 1,000 or 2,000 megawatt between now and June. And I think that goes to my bullet point. I always share with this, it's important to get the right optimizations, the right structures. But I have to give my 2 cents here, as this is a broad forum, is that we need the steel in the ground. We need to actually get all the new resource implementation. I think Don talked about this a little bit more also, but let's don't forget the fact that we need to get the good coordinations, getting steel in the ground, getting the actual battery resources coordinated, tested, commercialized, and actually become commercials and could actually get into bidding, because there's a lot of resources right now that are still in the testing, and you still have to go through all the testing before you could even bid. That's not a process that I'm working on as well.
I want to keep teasing this out. And I definitely agree with everything you just said, Dee. And so I'm going to abruptly change the subject, and don't take it as I don't agree with everything you just said, and that the new resource implementation enhancements are really important. And so maybe we can circle back to that towards the end of the conversation, but I want to stay on reliability for a second. So with what we have, even if, let's assume you get 10, I'll give you another 4,000 megawatts. There you go. You have more steel in the ground. Focusing on that, we need the market optimization to provide the lift that it can provide. What is that optimal use of that storage across the day? Talked about day ahead working. I'm fine if panelists, you want to touch on day ahead, or real time. So take this where you'd like. But what I want to tease out is, what are the reliability issues that you all have seen that has made you think to yourself, the way that we're using storage is not quite meeting the target? And so first, let's try to hone in on that, the issue statement, and then kind of go from there. Can I go with you first, Dee?
Sure. Yeah. So I think observation-wise, let's talk about. I think when we get to summer, it's much easier. And the reasons why I said that summer is much easier, because it's very predictable. Summer is very predictable. It's when it's gonna be hot. We know it's gonna be hot. We could see it. There's all these things, but it's always sunny in California. In summer, it is always sunny in California. So there's very, very, very few variability. So summer is much easier and much more predictable. And the day ahead does give me a lot more, what Alva mentions, and I think Don just also mentioned this, give us a much better pictures, because we optimize for 24-hour. So yes, we might get into situations where real-time prices goes above, and then all of a sudden you're seeing all the storage comes in, because you're imagining all the stuff. But that's actually, to me, that's actually the less reliability of an issue, because we have system operators that can actually track where we are with regard to state of charge, and we'll end up resorting to exceptional dispatch, manual dispatch. It's not the most optimum, not the most efficient, like Don was mentioned, but we have tools to manage the reliability portions of that. Now, that's summer. That's a completely different story if we are talking about spring, for example, or a cloudy days, or days where winter, right? That's actually even more challenging during winter, because you don't know your ability to charge or discharge. I think you mentioned about the bit spread, for example. You don't know if you don't know whether or not today you're going to be charging at $30 to discharge at $40, or you're going to be charging at $60 to discharge at $70. That is actually harder to do during a winter day. And that's why I think winter day is, or spring day is actually more, I've observed that lagging behavior, because you just don't know at what price you will be charging versus discharging, because there's no certainty of how much resources that you get in a non-summer day. In the summer day, it's pretty stable. But if you're talking about the winter, completely different story.
Thank you very much. Any other thoughts from the panelists, please?
So, I agree that you can take out of market actions but the issue there is the market optimization is going to put you in a position to where you have to take a manual action, and you have to wait until you observe it happening to start taking the manual action. And I think if we had the flexibility to allow these resources, again, get themselves in the right order in the bid stack, that the market optimization won't put us in a position where it's problematic. And so, you know, I think, like I said, I think there are ways that we can that to me is the core issue, is we've got these resources in these when it's tight system conditions or high priced events. We've got them they're positioned in the bid stack where we don't want them to be. We just need to address that as quickly as possible.
And just a sort of a follow-up question for the panel. I mean, it seems like in an ideal world, we could have a longer look ahead in real time. And I think all these problems would go away, and we could do the spread bidding would solve everything. But I'm told we can't we can't run a 6 or 8 hour look ahead on 5 minutes every 5 minutes. Right? It's not doable. But I mean, what can we do? I mean, is there a way? Because what bothers me is unless we can sort of automatically internalize these updating the price signals and updating the bids to reflect the current market conditions, you're asking a lot of all the scheduling coordinators of all these resources to guess at what the prices are going to be, and they don't have the full picture.
Yeah, and I think that's where it gets, what you're getting at is what is a simple solution that we can implement? I think, you know, if you took a pure economist view, they'd be like, you need to know exactly what the cost is going to be 5 hours from now, because that's when you're going to need to be, that's what you would have been charged if you discharged now. Who knows what that price is? We could probably debate for years on what it is. No one would ever agree to it. And so that's why like I said, I've been focused more on, let's just get the stack right. And that way we make sure that we don't discharge it when we know we don't want to discharge it. And if you do and if you look at the way that they do the automatic reference level adjustments, for instance, for a gas resource can bid $2,000 anytime they want during the high priced conditions. But if they bid $2,000 and their resource specific cost is calculated only at $1,200, Cyber takes it all the way down to $1,200 and says, there's your bid. It's $1,200. I think you should do exactly the same thing for storage and for some of the hydro resources, where sure, I can put it as a storage resource. I think the cost should be $1,800, and I put it in at $1,800. And the CAISO does the calculations come back that it's only $1,200, then you take my bid to $1,200. But at least I'm at the $1,200 level in the bid stack. I'm above gas. Especially since storage has a round trip efficiency. I'm going to be above gas. Like I say, we get there. I don't think you can solve all of the issues. I think there's issues with imports that can try to buy back their day ahead positions at a price higher than what storage or hydro could offer. Just watch for that. You know, if you calculate the maximum import bid price correctly, why would you do that? Then you should be making the wrong economic decision. But we can just watch that. And I think if you look at exports or low priority exports that come into HASP, I think that's where the operators can take action. If they see that those schedules are coming in and getting all of these day ahead, intraday ahead, opportunity cost resources out of position relative to where they are in the day ahead, then you can manually intervene and curtail those processes, even though they made it through the HASP process.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think once your portfolio gets to be a couple hundred megawatts, you should be doing it with software, and the software should include a real-time forecast and real-time adjustment of the bids. It's not really a reasonable way to use a resource that has as much flexibility as a battery has to not have some, you know, you basically just have, if you don't have the algorithm yourself, you have to find somebody who has the algorithm to do that. That's just my belief. We have a 200 megawatt battery, and we would not consider trying to manage the real-time risk on price ourselves, because it's just too volatile. I will say Doug and I have been having a friendly debate about how, if you just want to manage your day, essentially protect your day ahead schedules, whether they're your base schedules or your awards, and you're willing to offer flexibility around that, there is a tool that CAISO has developed, which I think merits looking at, which is the target SOC parameter. You can put into your bid an end of hour SOC that you want to be at, and you can essentially with a maximum and minimum level in such a way that you can keep SOC in critical hours at a level that will assure you you can potentially deliver your day ahead awards. There are risks involved with that. It's not riskless because essentially it's a lot like self-scheduling. You're saying I want you to get me to a given state of charge, whatever the price is. But I think it's a tool that's worth looking at if what your real concern is, when in discussing with Don, if our concern is that we're going to buy back a day ahead schedule that we got paid $1,000 for, and we're going to pay $3,000 to buy it back, then I might well use a target state of charge to guarantee that I am going to be able to deliver that full amount for those hours. The CAISO did it for us with the minimum state of charge constraint, last year and the year before. They've given us the tool to do it, and I think it's worth looking at.
Thanks, Alva. Pam, did you want to respond?
I think for some of these questions, we're still more in the integration stage, and I appreciate the dialogue and the thoughts around managing state of charge and some of the tools to do that. I think that our lessons, I think, from the January events really do show the need to ensure that these tools are workable, not just for the integrated market, but for the Western Energy Imbalance market. We're building and investing in storage for the capacity and the flexibility value that it provides, and making sure that we are able to get those two values, especially in the resource efficiency evaluations, every hour, while ensuring those resources are deployed optimally from an energy perspective, I think is a really critical piece of the conversation that I think is a layer into a lot of the conversation here around integrating these resources into the ISO market itself.
Thanks, Pam. Can I lean in on that? So wanted to touch on some of those like prospective challenges, but there's also there was a specific issue in the catalog that, as my sector went through it and was trying to think about things that maybe were still in play. And I'll speak for myself. I didn't fully understand it, but this has really resonated to me about storage, and not for any kind of WEIM entity. So there was one issue about concerns with passing your balancing test. So for RSE, passing your balancing test while also trying to think about the need to manage that use limitation, so that the use limitation of those resources meeting your balancing test weren't being used up through submitting a base schedule. So I believe the catalogs that we kept in R40 that we submitted was to have the ability to also submit a participating resource offer or kind of more flexible resources that you're using to pass the balancing test. Is that still a concern for the WEIM entities, that you have these flexible resources, including now storage? So when you talked about how you're thinking about it, you didn't specifically mention RSE. So I was wondering if you could kind of bring this forward, since it is an issue that's still kind of in the catalog.
So I think for us, our concern is more around the flexibility test, and so the balancing test. So the balancing test obligates us to base schedule to within 1% of the CAISO forecast of PGE's load. And that's something that we should be able to do that on an hourly basis. I think the extra piece that is challenging is to bring both the upward and downward flexibility on top of that base schedule, and to align those flexibility bids with the CAISO's requirements for the flexibility test. And those requirements can vary a lot. And I think there's been a lot of conversation in the past, including at the RIF, around the impact of variable energy resource forecasts on those bids, and whether the flexibility test is properly accounting for the forecasted online generation of, say, a wind project. So we don't need to belabor that piece of the conversation, but for the flexibility test, being able to count the available portfolio for flex, even if it's not something that is necessarily going to be part of a base schedule in the balancing stack, I think is an important piece for really being able to consistently get across the RSE threshold, and that the easiest tool for managing that, like the tool for managing that is price. So on average price days, price is a very good tool for managing flex and showing that you have that availability in your system, and that availability is able to be utilized by the market. But when your prices get to be really above $700 to $800, bid does not become a useful tool for managing flex while protecting the energy that is there, like the storage energy, either a hydro storage resource or a battery storage resource. So the capability is on the system, but the tool to effectively manage it is, I think, constrained by some of everything that we've talked about here.
All right, I told people to hold their questions, and I'm realizing we're running out of time. So if there are questions from any of the liaisons or anyone in the room or online, please raise your hands. John.
This is John Rubble from Southern California, Edison. I was just opening up the curtailment report for March 17th, 2024, and then there it talks about how much has been curtailed all the way through this year. And it's pretty close to about a terawatt hour, just a little under a terawatt hour through the first 2.5 months of the year. And I took a look at the prices, real time and day ahead, and there's significant negative prices that we're experiencing every day. And it makes me want to go back over to DD, and because I think what this is somewhat saying is we need more steel on the ground. We need greater capacity to suck up that which is being curtailed today to discharge at these times to prevent those very, very high prices. So it just, I don't really have necessarily a point other than I do agree with Dee Dee that if there's one thing that we really want to have happen before the end of the summer or beginning of the summer is as much steel on the ground as possible. And I think some of these problems might start solving themselves in a different sort of way.
I'll add to that. I think I get a lot of these questions. You look at the curtailment megawatt hour, it's been large, especially February, March. And if you actually look at that, a lot of them are green, which is economic local curtailment. I'll share with you that a lot of the economic local curtailment is because of congestion. You could actually see that congestion prices. So that's another portion about. The great thing about battery is we can put it pretty much anywhere that we actually have land. If we could get that in the more spread out place so that we don't get into this congestion, I think that would be very cool.
Thanks, John. Any other questions? Okay, we got one in the room.
Hi, just a quick sound check. Can you hear me? Yeah, this is Rahul from AES. So going back to question where Pam, you mentioned that, for those storage assets which are in EIM, they would benefit from having a longer or market horizon more than 4.5 hours because there is no day ahead schedule in absence of self-scheduling. Looking back from DD from operations or from others who have experience with storage, do you see any benefit of having longer market horizon for storage?
Repeat the questions again. I'm trying to.
So I'm piggybacking on that.
you see the benefit of having a real-time optimization speed beyond the 4.5 hours.
As you think of storage.
So it's just like anything else. I think I've always mentioned this. The markup optimizations will optimize it, and it's actually smarter than any human being that you can have, right? It's like an AI or whatever you want to call it. It really depends on the actual data that comes in. And if we could get into, I think we've had these discussions before, and the questions, because if we actually do get more than 4.5 hours, I think we could benefit from it to the extent that we have a good base schedule, a good forecast, and everything that is needed in there. And that comes with a partnership with all the WEIM entity to be able to get the base schedules more than 4.5 hours, forecast that is more than 4.5 hours, and all those other stuff. So I think we've looked at, as long as you can get the 2 peak, right? I think you don't have to get 24 hours. You got to be able to get the 2 peaks and be able to get the good base schedule and the good forecast for the 2 peaks period. And I think that's where the real challenge is, not just computations that we got to get every 5 minutes to all stuff. The real challenge is actually, can we get into good forecast for that next whatever hours that we have?
Yeah, and this is Don. I'll just add, there is a practicality to it. I mean, can you actually solve it? But I think there's also, it's important to remember, in the real-time market, there's only one binding interval on the horizon. So you actually need to introduce the full settlement of it as well, which will be a huge lift as well, in terms of, just think of the amount of data if you did balance of the day at 5 minutes and you settled it every 5 minutes. So but I think that's the key, is you need to settle the whole thing, not just run it. And when I say whole thing, I mean the horizon.
I mean, I think Alpha pointed out that the day ahead market has a lot of tools for this kind of management, and that extension into the day ahead market would help hopefully solve some of the challenges that we're experiencing with limited energy resources, and have them more, have them optimized day ahead, rather than trying to, like, having that 4-hour look ahead window, just go, oh, look, it's a cheap resource. That energy limit would be better seen by the market over the full day. So I think that there's other tools, but that within the WEIM itself, I think there's probably challenges with just that computing power issue that Dawn was bringing up versus the benefits of seeing more optimized look aheads.
I'll express an opinion, which this is my personal opinion. So I think it should be possible to do a multi-hour market, not every 5 minutes, but essentially if you're just rerunning, in the day, for the day. But the basic problem is what Dee Dee was essentially alluding to, which is, can you essentially get people to submit binding bids for that whole period? Because they have to be willing to settle on that, just as Don said. If they're not, if they just want to continue putting in bids and then modifying them an hour later, and you don't get to charge me for the consequences, then it's not going to be feasible. But I mean, solving another day of market is just, essentially more computers, right? So it's not like it's an impossible job. Settling every 5 minutes is an impossible job for people who do settlements. But solving a day of market is not impossible. It's just people really don't want to do that. I think that's the other thing I just want to mention is target state of charge is a real-time parameter, so not day ahead. So that would be something that could be potentially useful.
Yeah, I like your idea about running the day ahead market. An hourly market multiple times a day could help with positioning the resources without people having to guess at prices. I think, as much as I'd love to continue this conversation for another hour, we need to wrap up. But I want to thank all of the panelists for making yourselves available and your great thoughts.
We have a couple quick things to just before we wrap up. I think we've got a couple of introductions that we didn't do at the beginning. of the meeting, but I think it would make sense to do now. Kathleen, do you want to take the lead on that?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Meg. So I wanted to take this time to introduce two new liaisons. So the IPP and marketer sector is cycling out our liaisons. And I wanted to introduce, and I am going to be like, why don't you guys come on up? You want to come on up? Let's see your faces. It's more fun that way. The new IPP and marketer sector liaisons, effective tomorrow. And we'll have them introduce themselves real quick. Sorry for no warning. Where's the gavel? Where's the gavel?
Hello, thank you, Kathleen. So my name is Scott Olson. I'm the Director of Western U.S. Regulatory Affairs for Avangrid Renewables. In my role, I oversee Avangrid's representation in the regulatory and market space in the Western U.S., with the exception of the Pacific Northwest. I have a colleague in Portland who handles that, but my responsibility is California, Desert Southwest, and Intermountain West. So Avangrid Renewables has about 7 gigawatts currently of operational resources in the United States, about 2.5 gigawatts here in the WEC. I'm based in the Bay Area and have spent quite a bit of time focused on the California markets in my previous roles with NRG, Direct Energy, and then prior to that, working as a renewable energy consultant for a couple different energy firms, Black & Veatch and Nexent. I have a background in both engineering and public policy, and very excited certainly to take over the role that Kathleen and Ian have made. Big shoes to fill for sure, but certainly excited to be part of the IPP and marketer sector.
Thanks, Scott. So I'm Rahul Kalaskar. I'm Director of Reg Affairs at AES. AES is a Fortune 500 company. We are a large IPP in different countries. Within US, we are building renewable power plants all over the US. We have a significant focus in California. AES also owns once-through cooling assets that are in Southern California, and we operate those. As for my background, I'm an ex-CAISO employee. I've spent almost 13 years at CAISO. I was part of Anna's team and had significant experience working with the EIM implementation. Currently in my role, I'm tracking rules and regulations at all the ISOs, PUCs across the US. I have a small team who we track rules and regulations. For this role, it's really, I'm going to try to fill those big shoes that mainly Kathleen has done a pretty good job. Even though she's going to transition over, I think there's going to be a lot more leaning on Kathleen. It's very difficult to replace that charm, but here to serve the IPP and marketer sector and looking forward to contributing in the future.
Thank you both very much for stepping in. We are looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you. And with that, I'd like to extend a special thanks to our 3 liaisons who are rotating off of the RIF, Kathleen Colbert, Ian White, who I believe is on the WebEx today, and Matt LaCar. Kathleen, Matt, and Ian have all made incredibly significant contributions to the liaison group. Kathleen and Ian have served, I think, 2 years, a little over 2 years at this point. We joined at the same time. Matt, with you rotating off, it truly is the end of an era. I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that your knowledge of kind of how the RIF has evolved over the years has been so critical to how we have been able to structure our conversations, and has really provided important context. So thank you for that. And welcome to the new liaisons. I'm looking forward to working with you. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't extend thanks to Josh Walter for his incredible leadership over the last year. I think we have all appreciated your very pragmatic approach to how we have structured our meetings, decided on topics, and conducted conversations. And I hope to continue that tone as chair. So thank you. Thanks to everyone for participation today. I think we had a great roundtable discussion and the storage panel was absolutely fantastic. I think that is it. Please stay tuned for scheduling regarding our next meeting. We are aiming for June, I believe, in conjunction with the governing body meeting in Boise. But scheduling is to be confirmed. So look for information on that. And I believe we can adjourn to a reception across the hall. Thanks, everyone.